from all-round top student to chief scientist. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351 Fluid Mechanics is quite interesting. A month later. In Wu City, at the Naval University of Engineering. As one of China's 35 military academies, the Naval University of Engineering has trained numerous outstanding officers for the Navy and provided the Chinese Navy with numerous advanced naval technologies. For example, Ma Weimin, a renowned alumnus of the Naval University of Engineering, mastered electromagnetic catapult technology, enabling China's Hujian aircraft carrier to become one of only 2 aircraft carriers in the world equipped with this technology. This allowed China, once ridiculed for possessing only one aircraft carrier, purchased from another, to truly possess naval technology that defied the world. Of course, Ma Weimin's popularity among military enthusiasts stems from more than just this. This is the most notable aspect. His achievements are far more numerous. After all, he is the second person to be described by American experts as capable of commanding 10 divisions. The news that the superconducting magnetohydrodynamic propulsion technology, developed under Ma Weimin's leadership, was about to undergo underwater testing attracted a crowd of visitors. Of course, due to the top-secret status of room-temperature superconductors, only those with access to this secret, such as Navy officer Hong Fang, were permitted to observe. Many people stood near the large experimental pool at the Naval University of Engineering, all gazing at a massive device mounted atop a massive structure. This massive device measures the forces acting on underwater structures, allowing them to calculate their actual speeds. It also measures various other performance parameters, providing testing for naval equipment. The massive device was the new magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system they had spent a month developing. Next, they would lower this newly designed magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system underwater to test its thrust. Everyone on Ma Weimin's team had been eagerly anticipating this event. In the stands, a man in a naval uniform stood beside Ma Weimin. His shoulder insignia bore golden wheat ears and 3 golden stars. This man was Hong Fang of the Navy. Hong Fang looked at the thing on it and said to Ma Weimin, who was standing next to him with a smile, "Old Ma, I heard that this thing of yours can increase the speed of our submarine to about twice as fast as before." Ma Weimin smiled and said, "That was before, now it has become 3 times faster." Hong Fang was stunned. "What? 3 times?" Ma Weimin nodded and said, "Besides, strictly speaking, this thing is not mine." Hong Fang smiled and said, "I know, it belongs to everyone in your team." Ma Weimin was stunned for a moment, not knowing what to say. And the person next to Ma Weimin spoke for Ma Weimin. "General Hong, this is indeed considered to be the thing of everyone in our team. Of course, in addition to this, I need to say that we can develop it mainly because of the great help of Professor Lin Xiao." Hong Fang was stunned for a moment. "Lin Xiao? Is he the Professor Lin who developed the lithography machine in CCDI?" Yes, Ma Weimin replied. Hong Fang was immediately surprised. "Professor Lin can also build submarines." Ma Weimin laughed. "Haha, that's more than that. It's no exaggeration to say that Professor Lin is an all-rounder." Just then, a voice rang out from behind them. "Academician Ma," it was Lin Xiao. "Finally, I've made it. Your place is a bit hard to find," Lin Xiao said, walking up to Ma Weimin. Ma Weimin laughed heartily and said, "Glad you're here. Let's officially begin our experiment. Oh, by the way, let me introduce you. This is General Hong Fang." Lin Xiao glanced at the admiral in a naval uniform next to him, then smiled and extended his hand. "Professor Lin, I've heard a lot about you." Hong Fang shook Lin Xiao's hand and said with a smile, "I was just talking to Academician Ma, and he said that the stuff on this submarine was built by Professor Lin." Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment, then glanced at Ma Weimin, who smiled and nodded. Lin Xiao couldn't help but shake his head. "Hey, Academician Ma, I told you this is your project. I'm not trying to steal the credit." He also had to thank Ma Weimin for letting him know that this phenomenon could occur under the powerful force of superconductors. This also provided a huge boost to his search for the general solution to the NS equations. Now, after a month, his research has entered a very advanced stage. Although he can't prove it immediately, his 6th-level math level, the aura of a mathematical master, and the completely unhuman brain development all tell him that he is very close to success. Ma Weimin smiled and said, Professor Lin, don't talk so much to me. If you don't steal the credit from me, it's impossible for me to steal the credit. I haven't done much, so of course it can't be considered stealing the credit. At this time, Hongjun next to him said, well, you two scientists, don't do this kind of thing. Whoever belongs to him should be given credit. But then again, Professor Lin, why don't you do more research on our Navy in the future? You have come up with such a powerful thing for us right at the beginning. Maybe if you study it casually in the future, you can bring us some surprises. Hearing Hongjun's words, Lin Xiao was stunned, and then smiled and said, of course, if there is that opportunity, I will definitely study it. Besides, room temperature superconductors can also upgrade the electromagnetic catapults on aircraft carriers. There are other places. I estimate that CCDI alone is enough for you to eat for a while. Haha, we soldiers, who don't like novelty and dislike old things, Hongjun smiled and said, if Professor Lin can come up with some more powerful things, then we won't mind biting off more than we can chew. Lin Xiao laughed. The saying love the new and dislike the old makes sense. At this moment, the person next to Ma Weimin suddenly said, Academician Ma, we've reached the designated depth. Oh? Already? Ma Weimin glanced over at the nearby control panel. The monitor showed that the new magneto-hydrodynamic thruster had descended to a depth of 20 meters. Okay, let's begin the test now. Ma Weimin immediately gave the order to begin. Okay, then, the numerous staff members on site began to work, turning on and off switches and testing systems. With all preparations complete, the underwater magneto-hydrodynamic thruster finally started. A powerful current instantly flowed through the fluid channel. The CCDI coil hidden in the thruster was already fully charged, and the extremely strong 19T magnetic field instantly pushed the liquid in the channel into motion. Meanwhile, above the pool, Lin Xiao and the others stood at the control panel, watching the underwater scene through the monitor. Because the magneto-hydrodynamic thruster was securely fixed to the overhead platform, it didn't move. However, the surging water still stirred violently underwater. Seeing this, Ma Weimin quickly asked, have you detected any eddies? On the other side, a staff member exclaimed in delight, we've detected them. Eddies. Very strong eddies, great. Ma Weimin clenched his fists and turned to ask, how is the thrust now? The thrust is 2.1 times that of the previous experiment. The staff member on the other side was also delighted 2.1 times. What a delightful number. And remember, this is Wu City, so the water in their experimental tank is fresh water, not real seawater. Different waters have different electrical conductivities. Ordinary natural water has a conductivity of about 50-500 cm, while seawater has a whopping 30,000 cm. This huge difference in conductivity translates to a significant difference in thrust. Once the experiment was carried out in seawater, the actual thrust it would generate would surely astonish everyone. Ma Weimin excitedly hugged Lin Xiao beside him. Professor Lin, we succeeded. The feeling was just like when he first saw the... Yes, it worked. Lin Xiao smiled, a slight sigh of emotion in his heart. Accidentally, he had mastered another piece of military technology. Hong Feng, who was standing by, saw this scene. His eyes lit up even more. He began to imagine that once a submarine equipped with this propulsion system was launched, it would be a huge boost to their navy's strength. He even wanted to dismantle a nuclear submarine and replace it with this propulsion system to try it out. He acted immediately, so he immediately said to Ma Weimin, Old Ma, hurry up and test the stability of this thing. If it works, I'll build you a nearly decommissioned nuclear submarine by the end of the year. Ma Weimin immediately said, so that means we still have 6 months? That's basically no problem, as long as there's no problem with the thruster, and of course, I trust Professor Lin's calculations. In principle, there's no problem. Okay, it's settled. Hong Feng made the decision immediately. He certainly had the final say on using a nuclear submarine for scientific experiments. Ma Weimin smiled. If something took a long time to develop and then wasn't deployed, he would have been anxious. But now with this person making the decision, there was no problem. However, at this moment, Ma Weimin suddenly turned to look at Lin Xiao, only to find him staring seriously at their control panel. Professor Lin, what's wrong? Lin Xiao came back to his senses and slowly shook his head. Nothing, I just suddenly found fluid mechanics quite interesting. After a pause, he said, by the way, Academician Ma, could you send me these experimental data later? Fluid mechanics is quite interesting. Ma Weiman didn't know why Lin Xiao suddenly said this, but he didn't care. He said directly, "Of course, no problem, just don't leak it, thank you." Lin Xiao nodded and returned his gaze to the various data on the operating table. At this moment, he was not looking at simple data, but actual experimental data, a direct reflection of the solution to the NS equations. He thought he was one step closer to solving the final problem. Chapter 352 Lin's curvature tensor. Congratulations to the host for constructing a vortex-type magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system. Rewards: 1000 math experience, 2000 physics experience, 50 truth points. Congratulations to the host for advancing to level 6 in physics. Reward: Physics Master Halo. Detected that the host already possesses the Physics Master Halo. Now, the reward is changing. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the Neural Current Interpretation book. As the basic inspections of the magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system were completed, Lin Xiao's mind began to receive a series of system notifications. Upon hearing these notifications, Lin Xiao's vision suddenly lit up. Physics had finally reached level 6. The subsequent rewards surprised Lin Xiao even more. Reaching level 6 automatically rewards a Master Halo? No wonder he'd also been awarded a Math Master Halo when he'd previously achieved level 6 in math. However, because he'd previously developed multidimensional field theory, the system had already awarded him a Physics Master Halo, and now, he'd been rewarded with a different one. So, the multidimensional field theory I developed back then was directly identified by the system as something that could only be developed by a physics level 6 or higher. Lin Xiao couldn't help but smile at the thought. But what was the reward called? The Neural Current Interpretation book. Judging by the name, could it be technology that could translate neural signals? He remembered pondering this question before, and at the time, he'd thought it was extremely difficult and daunting. And now the system had simply rewarded him with it. He pondered it, and if that were the case, it wouldn't be a bad idea. Compared to artificial neural technology, the value of this technology for translating neural signals was almost unimaginable. Artificial neural technology could only save some people's lives, but this technology had the power to change all of humanity. Of course, while Lin Xiao was curious, he had no plans to explore this technology for the time being. He had to wait until he solved the NS equation problem he was currently facing. And at that moment, he suddenly felt a sinking sensation in his head. Apparently, it was the 0.7% increase in brain development gained from reaching level 6 in physics. His brain development had now reached 10.65%. The system's voice rang out again. Congratulations, host. Your brain development has reached 10%. Your brain's capacity has increased, now reaching 120% of its original capacity. So, please continue to expand your knowledge. Truth awaits you at the end. Upon hearing these words, Lin Xiao suddenly felt the temporary discomfort caused by his increased brain development disappear in an instant, and his mind became extremely clear. Lin Xiao's eyes suddenly lit up. His brain's capacity had increased, which meant that the workload on his brain had decreased. Hence, this feeling of relief. And this feeling of relief also meant that he could use his brain better. Thinking of this, his face brightened with a smile. Ma Weiman, who was standing next to him, saw Lin Xiao's joy and couldn't help but smile. Professor Lin, why are you so happy? Lin Xiao came to his senses, then smiled and pointed to the experimental pool in front of him, saying, "Of course I'm happy in this situation." Ma Weiman also smiled happily. That's true. Hong Feng, who was standing next to him, laughed even more heartily. Of course. What they probably didn't know was that the young Professor Lin beside them was actually laughing because he had become smarter. In contrast, in his eyes, the others had become dumber. Next, the new magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system underwent another 10-day test. 10 days is a normal mission cycle for a nuclear submarine. Because they use nuclear fission as their energy source, they can operate continuously underwater for very long periods of time. According to existing records, the longest submarine has been submerged underwater is 90 days. However, generally speaking, submarine crews can only stay for a maximum of 60 days, and any period beyond that will inevitably cause some symptoms. Therefore, their magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system must ensure stable operation for at least 60 days. Of course, after these 10 days of operation, its basic capabilities have been basically verified. It can maintain stable thrust without any problems. In addition, The internal vortex state is also maintained, ensuring a constant flow of water. Beyond these basic tests, they also use the test tank to simulate more complex environments, such as undercurrents and conditions of increased water pressure. After a series of tests, the MHD thruster successfully completed its mission without exception. Therefore, they were essentially certain that the vortex-type MHD thruster was capable of handling a wide range of missions. Next, they would conduct longer tests, perhaps 30 or even 60 days, to further ensure the MHD thruster's stability. Otherwise, if the MHD thruster were installed on a submarine without knowing its stability, and the submarine suddenly lost power while conducting a mission in the deep sea, it would likely become a deep-sea ghost ship, perhaps even plummeting to the bottom of the ocean, becoming a giant bololi. Of course, with this step, Lin Xiao's mission was complete. The vortex-type MHD thruster, a truly perfect submarine propulsion system, would empower their nuclear submarines to become the underwater harbingers of the future. He had already returned to Shangjing when he learned of the success of the 10-day experiment. The person who broke the news to him was Ma Gaolian. "Professor Lin, it has to be you," Ma Gaolian said with a smile as he arrived at Lin Xiao's office. "There's something true about that. Professor Lin knows if something works the first time he sees it. Your vortex-type magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion system is truly amazing." Although Ma Gaolian hadn't personally witnessed it, the news he received later confirmed that Lin Xiao had undoubtedly brought them another important technology. With this technology, their naval strength would achieve another qualitative leap. After all, it's important to remember that nuclear submarines play a vital role in the nuclear triad. Therefore, the power of their nuclear submarines is directly related to the effectiveness of their nuclear triad. Therefore, Lin Xiao's new technology holds crucial significance for their national defense. When Lin Xiao heard what Ma Gaolian said, he just smiled and said, "It's just luck. I believe everything others say about luck, but I don't believe what you say about luck, Professor Lin." Ma Gaolian smiled and waved his hand, then asked inquiringly, "However, Professor Lin, since you have solved this problem, does it mean that you have also solved the NS equation?" Lin Xiao waved his hand, still a little bit short. Still a little bit short. Ma Gaolian was stunned, then smiled and said, "It seems that I can wait for the day when Professor Lin completely solves this difficult mathematical problem. You must tell me then." Hearing what Ma Gaolian said, Lin Xiao smiled slightly and made an okay gesture. "Of course, no problem." "Yeah," Ma Gaolian nodded, then said, "In addition, I actually have another matter to talk to you about. The second phase clinical trial of artificial nerves has ended, and now we are preparing for the third phase clinical trial." "Oh? That's good." Lin Xiao nodded. "How are the people in the second phase doing?" "Not bad," Ma Gaolian said with a smile. "I heard that many of those 6 people can now run and jump. A lot of doctors say it's nothing short of a miracle." Lin Xiao smiled. "That's good. Being able to achieve this was exactly what the developer had in mind. Many people, including those online, are now praising this as the greatest invention of the 21st century, and he's been hailed as the living Huatuo of the 21st century." Lin Xiao took these comments to heart. "Well, that's it for now. I need to go to the superconductivity lab to check out another experiment. It seems to have been successful." "Oh? What technology?" "That's Professor Shu Qingzong from back then. He seems to have developed microwave weapons." Lin Xiao raised a brow. "Microwave weapons?" Then he smiled and said, "Okay, go ahead." "Yes." Ma Gaolian said nothing more and left Lin Xiao's office. Lin Xiao, on the other hand, marveled at what his small research institute had come up with. Of course, everyone was working diligently on this, so it was time for him to keep working hard. He returned his gaze to the draft paper before him, which was covered in a complex web of formulas. A mathematician would be surprised to discover that what Lin Xiao had written resembled Riemann curvature, yet it wasn't. It was something entirely new. This was a new mathematical theory Lin Xiao was experimenting with, inspired by the eddy currents in magneto-hydrodynamic channels. To find a general solution to the NS equations, existing mathematical theories were clearly insufficient. He needed to create an entirely new mathematical theory. Based on the fluid model of the eddy current magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion system, I can directly construct a completely new equation. Using the Cauchy-Lipschitz theorem, we can attempt such a construction. Rho, V, W equals U V W U U and, Looking at the equation, Lin Xiao stroked his chin, pondered for a moment, and then continued writing. For fluids, no matter how they change, their molecules ultimately form boundaries that can be defined by equations. Furthermore, precisely because of the existence of these molecules, these fluids are differentiable. Seeing this, Lin Xiao couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. If you were to differentiate down to the molecular level, the subsequent computational effort would become enormous. Of course, he quickly gave up on the worry. The current massive computational effort was all preparation for the final simplification. It's like a math problem on an exam. After a series of complex calculations, the final answer is a simple 0, 1, or 2022. So, based on this differentiability, I can construct a completely new theory of curvature. Lin Xiao's brows twitched, a hint of joy showing. He had already spent countless hours constructing this new theory. And now, his thoughts were finally flowing freely, and the next steps were crystal clear in his mind. R equals Euclid R dxk. Finally, Lin Xiao stopped writing. Finally, it's done. Well, let's call it the Lin curvature tensor. Chapter 353 General solution of an S equation. The Lin curvature tensor can be used to describe many states of fluids. In differential form, it can be used to describe a type of manifold. A manifold can be directly considered a fluid or a curved surface. For example, if you bend a perfectly smooth steel plate, its surface forms a manifold. The Riemann curvature tensor, for example, can be used to express the standard formula for the curvature of a Riemann manifold. However, the Lin curvature tensor Lin Xiao developed describes a different type of manifold, one that isn't necessarily smooth, as it can even be angled rather than curved. Therefore, this manifold can be named after Lin Xiao, the Lin manifold. By combining these two, Lin Xiao will be able to perfectly describe fluids. Seeing this, Lin Xiao pursed his lips and smiled slightly. Then, based on the Lin curvature tensor, the vortex state of the fluid in the magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system can be described as follows: dt equals pf plus, p Greek letter rho equals pl plus 2 Greek letter mu, s plus l, u/3, plus. Although Lin Xiao wasn't directly seeking a general solution to the Navier-Stokes equations, he was attempting to solve the problem from the specific to the general. This process of moving from the specific to the general is also an important approach, and is crucial for solving the Navier-Stokes equations. After all, directly solving the general solution to the Navier-Stokes equations is extremely difficult. Even Lin Xiao had to admit this. Solving the Navier-Stokes equations from the specific to the general would be much easier. Of course, there had never been such a unique fluid case that could directly enable mathematicians to make the leap from the specific to the general. Coincidentally, Lin Xiao, having joined Ma Weimann's research project, discovered the vortex flow in the magnetohydrodynamic propulsion system, which could help him achieve this general to specific transition. Lin Xiao then proceeded to achieve continuous breakthroughs in his Navier-Stokes equations with unstoppable force. However, as he had previously discovered, the computational complexity of his Lin curvature tensor was immense, so this unstoppable pace took nearly a month. It was mid-July. At Kyoto University, in Lin Xiao's office, thus, based on equations 1, 5, 11, and 30, we can obtain Navier-Stokes equation, Vt plus V equals F1 Greek letter rho, write its characteristic equation, substitute equation 31 into the original equation and solve for B equals 1/2. Thus, we can find the general solution to the Navier-Stokes equations, Greek letter rho equals V1 plus. Substituting this general solution into equation 3 for verification, it's clear that both sides of the equation are equal. Thus, equation 32 can be proven to be the general solution to the Navier-Stokes equations. Thus, we can prove the existence of solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations. We can easily see that the general solution is smooth, so we can prove the smoothness of the solution to the NS equations. Therefore, a solution to the NS equations exists, and it is smooth. Proof complete. Writing the last two words stroke by stroke, Lin Xiao picked up the pen cap beside him and put the nearly empty gel pen back into its cap like a sword sheathing its back. Finally, it's done. Lin Xiao rubbed his sore wrist. For almost a month, he had been performing incredibly complex calculations, his mind working at full capacity every day. If his brain hadn't been working at 120% of its original capacity, he would have had to wait a while longer to figure it out. Then, looking at the general solution, imbued with mathematical beauty, Lin Xiao's face lit up with a smile of truth. The undulating waves followed a boat snaking through the lake. The turbulent air currents followed the flight of our modern jet plane, and the invisible currents rippled around the deep-sea submarine. Mathematicians and physicists firmly believe that understanding the solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations, from gentle breezes to turbulent flows, can explain and predict them. However, this equation, written down in the 19th century, has stumped these mathematicians and physicists, who revere it as their holy grail, for nearly 2 centuries. But finally, today, it has been completely solved. Lin Xiao, a mathematician and physicist, is undoubtedly the happiest scientist in the world. Meanwhile, the sound of a harvest echoes. System, congratulations, host, for proving the existence and smoothness of solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations and for completing their solution. The mysteries of fluids have been completely unlocked in your mind, bringing you one step closer to the truth. From now on, you will become the master of fluids. This reward: 15,000 math experience, 15,000 physics experience, 150 truth points, and aerodynamics diagram. Upon hearing such a lavish reward, Lin Xiao's face lit up with excitement. Wow, those 2 subjects combined gave him 30,000 experience points, not to mention 150 truth points. This officially pushed his truth points past the 1,000 mark, reaching 1,062.5. However, the additional reward of a pneumatic diagram left Lin Xiao puzzled. What was this thing? Just as he was about to take a look, there was a sudden, sharp knock on the door. He paused, then said, "Come in." Then, he saw a group of professors from the School of Mathematics enter. Leading the way were Suji and their dean, Zhao Qi. Seeing this scene, Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask, "What's up, everyone?" Zhao Qi said with a smile, "Academician Lin, congratulations. Our School of Mathematical Sciences has another academician." Suji also said, "You, boy, suddenly and quietly made the list of academicians. You're amazing." "Your teacher, I've only been an academician for a few years." Lin Xiao looked bewildered. "What? Academician, what? You didn't know yet?" The others were stunned by Lin Xiao's expression. Shouldn't Lin Xiao be the first to know? At this moment, Lin Xiao's phone suddenly rang. He looked over and saw it was Ma Gaolian. Looking at the crowd before him, he suddenly had a guess. As soon as the call was connected, Ma Gaolian on the other end came up and said with a smile, "Professor Lin Xiao, congratulations. You've become one of our academicians this year." Lin Xiao immediately said, "Director Ma, don't tell me anything else. First, tell me what happened. How did I suddenly become an academician?" "You didn't know yet." Ma Gaolian was stunned, but then he realized what was going on and smiled. "Oh, I know why you didn't know. Let me tell you, the official announcement of this year's new academicians has just been made, and your name is among them, and you're a member of both the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering. Professor Lin, congratulations." Lin Xiao was immediately surprised. "What? Academician of both the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering?" "Yes, haha. I'm looking forward to your dinner, Academician Lin," Ma Gaolian said with a smile. Of course, no problem." Lin Xiao finally came to his senses and responded. "Haha, then I won't bother you anymore. I have things to do too." "That's all," Ma Gaolian said with a smile before hanging up. "Okay," Lin Xiao replied, then put down his phone. Even then, he was still a little incredulous. He'd just become an academician like that? Wasn't that a bit too sudden? He was only 23. But then he remembered the old man's question, "Do you want to be an academician?" Well, he'd gotten it straight away. And he was a member of both academies. How many people in China currently hold both positions? Wasn't this a kind of imperial appointment? Ahem. Suddenly, he remembered the crowd in front of him. He raised his head and looked back at Suji and the others. They were all beaming at Lin Xiao. After all, the call Lin Xiao had just answered clearly indicated they were already aware of his academicianship. "Academician Lin, how are you?" Suji said with a chuckle. Looking at this young man, once his student, now an academician in the blink of an eye, Suji felt both gratified and filled with emotion. Geniuses are everywhere. Lin Xiao looked at the crowd, waved his hand, and said with a smile, "It's a treat." Of course, hearing Lin Xiao's words, the others laughed. "Okay. Then we can all look forward to Academician Lin's first celebration banquet, then we won't bother Academician Lin." With that, the group left. Seeing this, Lin Xiao shook his head with a smile. Just then, He saw three figures sneaking in. They were his three students. "Professor." "No, academician, Lin Xiao scolded with a smile. "Don't act pathetic here. You can just come along when the time comes." "Great. Long live the professor," Zhao Guodong shouted immediately. Li Min, who was standing next to him, slapped him in the face and said, "I told you to call him academician." Lin Xiao looked at the three of them excitedly, as if they had just been elected academicians. He waved his hand and said, "All right, don't stay here. Go do your own things." "All right, academician, you're busy." The three of them immediately bowed to Lin Xiao and quickly slipped away. As the door closed, the office finally returned to peace. Lin Xiao returned to his seat, his heart pounding for a moment as he accepted the title of academician added to his name. He then looked back at the general solution to the Navier-Stokes equation he had figured out. Now, he needed to refine the proof, hiding the general solution, leaving only the existence and smoothness of the solution. The general solution was of strategic significance, while the millennium problem itself was of relatively low value. Therefore, he could publish the proof of the Navier-Stokes equation in the millennium problem. As for the general solution, he would leave it to them to study on their own. Chapter 354 The Youngest Academician and the Shock of the Proof of the NS Equation. The announcement of the new academicians quickly sparked a flurry of online discussion. The appearance of Lin Xiao on both lists shocked and thrilled countless netizens. Their god Lin was on both lists. Members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering are generally distinguished. The former tends to focus more on scientific theory, while the latter focuses more on practical technology. For example, those who study mathematics, such as Su Ji, are members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, while those who study practical technology, such as Ma Weimin, are members of the Chinese Academy of Engineering. Those who hold membership in both academies naturally have made significant achievements in both fields. Lin Xiao's past achievements certainly warrant simultaneous election to both academies. Whether it's his theoretical breakthroughs in mathematics and physics, or his development and manufacture of photolithography equipment, he clearly has made significant breakthroughs in both theory and practice. Furthermore, while the development of room temperature superconductors hasn't yet gained widespread acclaim, everyone who knows about it understands the significance of this technology. As Lin Xiao had previously stated, room temperature superconductors are one of the three most crucial technologies humanity must master in the future. Therefore, his invention of room temperature superconductors is the primary reason he was elected to both academies. Of course, in the eyes of ordinary people, Lin Xiao's well-known achievements alone make his simultaneous election to both academies a truly remarkable achievement. Consequently, this matter has sparked heated online discussion. Lin Shen is Lin Shen, elected to both academies simultaneously. If only I could have even 1% of Lin Shen's accomplishments. Are netizens so self-aware these days? Just 1%? I remember many thought 1/10 was enough. You're kidding. Even 1% isn't enough now. Take, for example, the tens of thousands of parts in a lithography machine. Can you even manufacture 100 or so? Stop bashing me. I'm going to learn now. Lin Shen's election as an academician is what everyone wants. Let's not bring up the Beijing academician thing again. Even if he's not a scientist on Lin Shen's level, he should at least be a normal scientist, right? He should have done some useful research. By the way, should we continue to call him Lin Shen or academician Lin, whichever is more impressive? So which one is more impressive? Academician? But I think Lin Shen is pretty good too. Why not give Lin Shen the title of Chief Scientist of the Republic? From now on, we can just call him Chief Lin. That's a good proposal. Agree. Agree +1. The heated discussion among netizens spread the word. A 23-year-old academician, others at that age would have only graduated from college a year ago, and those geniuses would have barely become professors. Yet, Lin Xiao had surprisingly become an academician of a nation. If he wanted, he could even join another country's Academy of Sciences and become a foreign member. It was just a matter of filling out an application. Word of this quickly spread abroad, and even there, Lin Xiao was admired by many. People tend to have a certain admiration for the powerful, and Lin Xiao was clearly a scientific powerhouse worthy of such admiration. Consequently, foreign media outlets also covered the story. China's Lin Xiao becomes the world's youngest academician, 23-year-old academician, the most powerful genius in human history, the rise of empires, the ultimate scientist. For a time, Lin Xiao's ascension to the academy became a global concern. However, Just as the world was focused on Lin Xiao's ascension, Lin Xiao quietly published a paper on RZIV, which quickly caused a huge stir in the mathematical and physics communities. Proof of the existence and smoothness of solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations. This somewhat lengthy topic was like a bomb with a TNT equivalent of 10 million tons in the mathematical and physics communities. While Lin Xiao was becoming an academician, he also secretly solved another major problem of the millennium. The Navier-Stokes equations. Developed from the Euler equations and refined by Navier and Stokes in the 19th century, these equations have captivated countless fluid physicists and mathematicians, spanning tens, perhaps even hundreds, of thousands, if not more, of papers. Everyone aspires to unravel the mysteries of these equations and grasp the truths of fluid mechanics. Yet, at this very moment, what do they witness? The existence and smoothness of solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations, a millennium problem, have suddenly been proven? At the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, in that rather cozy afternoon tea restaurant, the mathematicians and physicists at the institute were all intently poring over their phones, computers, tablets, or whatever. Some even held on to scrap paper, calculating what was displayed on the screen. Clearly, for these mathematicians and physicists, the paper they were studying was none other than Lin Xiao's. Oh my God! Why are you ignoring me? Suddenly, a mathematician's eyes widened in a look of amazement and emotion. Everyone around him turned to look at the mathematician. He had a full beard, his white hair mixed with black, and he looked quite charming, middle-aged. Of course, that wasn't the main point. Everyone quickly recognized the mathematician's identity, Charles Pfefferman, winner of the Fields Medal and the Wolf Prize, another renowned figure in mathematics. Of course, the mathematicians present were all major figures in mathematics, Fields medalists, so it was hard to tell who was more accomplished. However, Pfefferman was the one who had done the most research on the Navier-Stokes equations. For example, the official description of the Navier-Stokes equations, the Clay Institute's Millennium Prize problem, was written by Pfefferman. And at this moment, Pfefferman exclaimed, "Could it be that Lin Xiao succeeded? Oh, well, then again, Lin Xiao's success wasn't really anything to be surprised about. After all, that unscientific guy was just too perverse." "Hey, Charles, how's it going?" Pompiri, sitting closest to Pfefferman, took the initiative to ask. Pfefferman, regaining his composure and noticing the numerous glances directed at him, spread his hands and said, "I still have a few questions I'd like to ask him personally, but considering every time I've tried, Lin Xiao has succeeded." Upon hearing this, every mathematician around him immediately shared a look of astonishment. That young man had once again solved a crucial problem in their field of mathematics. While they had initially been a bit shocked when they saw Lin Xiao publish this paper, they were now unconcerned. After all, it was Lin Xiao. If it were the people around them, they would probably be even more shocked. Of course, regardless, they all envied Lin Xiao's talent. In just a year, Lin Xiao had proved the Hodge conjecture at last year's Mathematicians' Congress, and a year later, he had probably also completed proofs of the existence and smoothness of solutions to the NS equations. For more than 2 decades, when had the Millennium Prize puzzle ever been so easy? Of course, the physicists nearby shared the same sentiments as the mathematicians. While these physicists primarily focused on quantum mechanics or relativity, with relatively little research into classical physics, this problem nonetheless belonged to their field of physics, a mathematical physics problem. Therefore, they were deeply envious of Lin Xiao's talent. Even multidimensional field theory, they hadn't produced many groundbreaking results to date. On the contrary, Lin Xiao, the originator of the concept, hadn't even researched it since its inception. This left them feeling frustrated. "Why don't you give us some more pointers? Just study it and then leave it alone," the physicists present sighed. The other mathematicians, observing the physicists' reaction, smiled. "Hey, as I said, Lin Xiao is our mathematician, not your physicist." The question finally freed the physicists from their sleepiness. "You're kidding. The NS equations are a physics problem, not a math problem. Please clarify this." "Alright, fellow physics students, stop comforting yourselves. What's happening is what it is. Lin Xiao is clearly a 100% mathematician. He uses mathematical methods to prove all the physics problems. Hey, Witten also solved them mathematically. Can you say he's a mathematician?" Not that I can't. You at that?" The much-loved debate over whether Lin Xiao is a mathematician or a physicist began at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. Mathematicians like Pfefferman didn't join the debate. Pfefferman simply smiled and said, "Looks like we can prepare to go to China to hear Lin Xiao's report." "That's true," the others nodded. Delaine smiled and said, "Come to think of it, I miss Chinese food too. I remember I had a steamed bun with meat last time, and it was quite delicious." Pompiri asked in confusion, "Isn't it called Rao Giamo?" Delaine was stunned. "Rao Giamo," he frowned, then said, "I don't remember clearly about this, but they put the meat in the steamed bun, so it should be called steamed bun with meat, right?" Pompiri thought about it and nodded. "That makes sense, then it's probably steamed bun with meat. I do miss their noodles called sauerkraut noodles, very fragrant." Seeing that this group of people were talking about food, Pfefferman said with a smile, "Okay, let's stop talking so much. Let's go ask Lin when his report will start." "That's right," the others nodded. Chapter 355 Pneumatic Diagram. In academia, the attention garnered by the Millennium Problem clearly outweighed Lin Xiao's academic achievement. The NS equations. The proof of the existence and smoothness of solutions. This, for the world, was far more significant than who became an academician. Unlike the Hodge conjecture, whose proof was a feast for the eyes of pure mathematics, the NS equations were, obviously, relatively rare. So, while people were at best surprised by Lin Xiao's proof of this world-class problem, they remained silent. After all, who had bothered to delve into a mathematical problem whose meaning was incomprehensible? However, the NS equations were studied by a vast number of people. Fluid mechanics is a vast field in physics, with numerous researchers. Crucially, it can be applied to practical, profitable endeavors. For example, in shipbuilding, the NS equations analysis of fluid forces is crucial to ship performance, and even remotely controlled ship models may require these techniques. Furthermore, the aircraft industry, from drones to rockets, relies on the NS equations for aerodynamic analysis. Furthermore, the NS equations play a crucial role in many other aspects, even directly determining whether they can make a fortune. Therefore, the proof Lin Xiao has completed is of vital importance to certain stakeholders. Consequently, countless people have begun to pay close attention to this matter. They are concerned about whether Lin Xiao's proof is correct. If it is, they can immediately use it to aid their research. If they are the first to develop a product that surpasses their competitors, the significance will be even greater. Of course, this doesn't mean that Lin Xiao's proof will directly benefit those who need to analyze fluid dynamics. It can only provide some auxiliary benefits, namely, simplifying the problems they are studying and making their research more convenient. The truly direct benefit lies in the general solution to the NS equations. Only this general solution can completely simplify all factors in fluid dynamics to the most simplified level, thus making the study of related problems infinitely simpler. Unfortunately, Lin Xiao has concealed this crucial answer. At this moment, Lin Xiao appears to be none of the outside world's anxiety. He was looking at the aerodynamic diagram the system had rewarded him. As the name suggests, an aerodynamic diagram is a graphical explanation of aerodynamics. It directly uses images to illustrate the numerous applications of the general solution to the NS equations. It includes diagrams of the aerodynamic distribution of the most perfect aircraft, from small to large. Beyond aircraft, it also includes diagrams of aerodynamic designs for spacecraft. Lin Xiao's eyes lit up at the sight of so many aerodynamic designs for spacecraft. These included not only rockets but also aerodynamic diagrams for spaceplanes. In particular, these rocket designs included aerodynamic designs for reusable rockets. These reusable rockets, with flaps designed for the recovery process, maintain a very stable attitude during the process, greatly facilitating recovery. Seeing this, Lin Xiao's eyes immediately lit up. A reusable rocket. This holds immense significance for the aerospace industry, as it means cost savings. Each rocket launch costs hundreds of millions of yuan, with the first stage being the most expensive. Without recovery technology, each launch effectively wastes all that money. However, with recovery technology, this translates to saving hundreds of millions of yuan for the next launch. SpaceX's rocket recovery technology is key to its profitability. For China, with the Xiangong Heavenly Palace currently in operation and astronauts aboard, regular supplies are needed, making these the most expensive express delivery, consuming a long March rocket each time, a cost that, if repeated several times over, would likely bankrupt some major companies. Therefore, reusable rockets are crucial at this time. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao immediately wrote it down and saved it on his computer. He also downloaded the aerodynamic designs for bombers, fighters, and carrier-based aircraft. Just as he finished these, there was a knock on the door. Ma Gaolian ran in, panting heavily. Seeing Lin Xiao sitting there as if nothing had happened, he said helplessly, "My dear Lord Lin, you really didn't even inform me about this big deal." Lin Xiao spread his hands. "What big deal happened, Ma Gaolian? Don't you think the problem you proved isn't a big deal?" Lin Xiao chuckled. "It really isn't a big deal." Ma Gaolian's eyes widened, and he was about to point his finger at the show-off and accuse him, but then he realized something. Seeing Lin Xiao's confident smile, he suddenly realized something. He immediately leaned over, rubbed his hands, and said, "Academician Lin. Lord Lin, my dear comrade Lord Lin, stop playing dumb with me. Tell me, do you have any other surprises?" Lin Xiao chuckled and then showed Ma Gaolian the aerodynamic design drawings he had just compiled. "Look at these things." Ma Gaolian was stunned, his face tinged with curiosity as he gazed at the objects above. "Are these planes and rockets?" Lin Xiao nodded and said, "This is a bomber, this is a carrier-based aircraft, and this is a fighter. Their aerodynamic designs are practically perfect." "Perfect?" Ma Gaolian's face was immediately filled with confusion. What did he mean? Lin Xiao smiled. "You'll see when the time comes, when the aerodynamic designers have a look. They should be able to figure it out." He then pointed at the rocket and said, "And this thing is actually a first-stage rocket. The aerodynamic design ensures a very stable landing." Ma Gaolian was startled again. "A first-stage rocket landing? Oh, rocket recovery is more appropriate," Lin Xiao said with a smile. Hearing this, Ma Gaolian stood up straight and said in disbelief, "Rocket recovery? Yes, this." Ma Gaolian's mind raced for several times before he quickly grasped the key question. "Wait, where did you get all these things?" "The hacker gave them to him." Lin Xiao answered sincerely in his heart, but aloud, "Because I already know the general solution to the Navier-Stokes equations." Ma Gaolian paused for a moment before finally realizing what Lin Xiao was talking about. He exclaimed, "What? General solution?" Lin Xiao's proof of the existence and smoothness of the solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations alone was enough to astonish him, but now Lin Xiao claimed he had not only proven the existence and smoothness of the solutions, but had even found the general solution? This was a general solution. Renowned physicist Richard Feynman once called the solution to the Navier-Stokes equations the last unsolved problem in classical physics. To this day, it remains unsolved, with even simplified versions of the Millennium problem remaining unsolved. And now Lin Xiao claims to have found the general solution? Ma Gaolian was utterly stunned. He immediately asked, "What's the general solution?" Lin Xiao raised his eyebrows and said, "Do you understand it?" Ma Gaolian was stunned for a moment, then a helpless expression appeared on his face. "Hey, look at what you said. At least give me some face." He thought for a moment, then looked at the aerodynamic design drawings that Lin Xiao had shown him, and asked, "Are you saying that you derived all these things based on the general solution?" Lin Xiao said, "Yes, I see." Ma Gaolian nodded. It seemed that the significance of this general solution was extraordinary. After all, Lin Xiao said that these aerodynamic designs were the most perfect designs. Then, this general solution would become a technical theory as important as the wave-coherent superposition equations. Lin Xiao's theory of superconductivity mechanism was still known only to him. He had never shared it with anyone else, and Ma Gaolian had never asked him about it. As long as they had this theory of superconductivity, even if the secret of future room temperature superconductors were revealed and foreign countries obtained it, and through analysis, they could determine the materials used, they would inevitably be unable to find a way to manufacture them without Lin Xiao's guidance. After pondering for a moment, Ma Gaolian said, "Well, let me take these aerodynamic designs first. We'll discuss the general solution later." "Okay, that's all." Lin Xiao nodded, then handed the aerodynamic design data to Ma Gaolian. Ma Gaolian glanced at the USB drive in his hand, squeezed it, and said to Lin Xiao, "Academician Lin, thank you again for your contribution. The country is fortunate to have you." Lin Xiao waved his hand. "Old Ma, let's not have these formalities between us, can we?" Ma Gaolian smiled and nodded, saying, "I was just having a sudden emotion. Don't worry. I'm leaving." With a wave, Ma Gaolian left. As the office door closed, Lin Xiao stood up and stretched. Come to think of it, the academic community should be anxious now, right? It's time to determine when the academic report should be held. Chapter 356 Neural Current Interpretation Book. Academic report begins. Lin Xiao naturally chose to hold his academic presentation at Shengjing University, with a date set for mid-August, August 15th. Dean Zhaoqi was naturally excited about this. Just kidding, this is the Millennium Mathematical Problem. It's a hugely anticipated event in academia, so this presentation is sure to attract a lot of attention. Just think of the buzz Lin Xiao received last year when he proved the Hodge conjecture. After Lin Xiao announced in his one-hour presentation that he would complete the proof at the upcoming Fields lecture, mathematicians from all over the world who hadn't originally attended the conference flew in. And now Lin Xiao is proving the existence and smoothness of solutions to the NS equations, which is sure to attract even more researchers than the Hodge conjecture. Mathematicians, fluid dynamics physicists, and even people from businesses, everyone will be there to join in the fun. Dean Zhaoqi has been beaming these past few days. Of course, to avoid a situation like Lin Xiao's proof of the Goldbach conjecture, which ended up being forced to move elsewhere due to overcrowding, attendees would naturally be carefully screened. At a minimum, they would need to be able to understand the NS equations, and at least solve the Bernoulli and Euler equations, as these are both precursors to the NS equations. Therefore, through this screening process, the number of attendees could be kept around 2,000, which would certainly accommodate the Peking University auditorium. Zhaoqi would definitely have to manage this carefully. After that, it was time to prepare for the lecture. With at least 1,000 international visitors, each of them talented individuals, the arrival of so many talented individuals was a great opportunity to retain them, even potentially leading to collaborations. This wasn't just Zhaoqi's priority, the university and government also expressed their concern and provided various assistance. In no time, preparations were complete, and all that remained was the day of the academic lecture. Of course, since there was still over half a month left, Lin Xiao wasn't rushing. Instead, he used this time to research something else, Neural Current Interpretation Book. This was a system reward given to him when he reached level 6 in physics. The name alone piqued Lin Xiao's curiosity. Previously, he'd been preoccupied with solving the NS equation, so he hadn't looked into its details. Now, he finally had the time to delve into it. Sure enough, it actually explains neural currents. He opened the book in his mind system and was amazed after reading the first few pages. It contained categorized translations of various neural currents, and based on the magnitude of these currents, it could be used to identify the commands represented by the various neural signals. For example, movements of the wrist, fingers, knuckles, and even individual muscles were all translated into neural signals in this book. Furthermore, there was a translation of the neural currents generated by the brain's thoughts. While the nerve currents controlling muscles throughout the human body are quantifiable, translating the neural currents of thoughts becomes significantly more complex. This is because human thought is highly variable, potentially even greater than the universe itself. People can imagine things that don't exist in this universe, and the universe itself is always finite. For example, the universe might exist only as a single universe, but people might imagine that the universe might be the brain of a living being, because the resulting image of countless galaxies in the universe closely resembles the neurons in the human brain. Of course, perhaps precisely because of the variability of brain thought, translating human thoughts is incredibly difficult. Therefore, the neural current translation book that Lin Xiao saw only translated a few things. For example, I want to eat, I want to sleep, or walk forward, walk backward, and so on. While relatively limited, even that is still far more comprehensive than the information controlling other nerves in the human body. This ultimately raises the question of why different currents convey different commands. This question likely requires further research. At the very least, it's likely that both the receiving and sending organs have specific targets that can translate these currents. However, this aspect didn't need to be considered, as it was the task of the human nerves themselves. After Lin Xiao reviewed all the information and finally exited the system, he still felt a sense of disbelief. Where on earth did this data come from? He even felt a little gory. He had a good idea for measuring so much nerve current, implant current measuring sensors in every nerve in a person's body, then have them perform various movements to interpret the current levels. But this method was obviously cruel and completely inhumane. After all, A person's nerves cover almost the entire body. Implanting so many sensors would make it impossible for the person to survive, and current surgery wouldn't support this. Therefore, the only option was to test it on more people. Of course, perhaps the system's data was copied directly from a cosmic database. Lin Xiao shook his head. Why was he even thinking about this? Anyway, this thing would definitely be useful. The mere fact that it could translate a portion of a person's thoughts was terrifying. For example, in the area of detecting lies, this thing could be extremely useful. Besides detecting lies, it could also realize Lin Xiao's original vision, the creation of mechanical prosthetic limbs and electronic prosthetic eyes. If artificial nerves merely allow paralyzed people to stand up, then mechanical prosthetic limbs could fully restore mobility to all physically disabled individuals, while electronic prosthetic eyes could even restore sight to the blind, potentially eliminating the need for classics like 3 Days of Light. The thought of this stirred a pang in Lin Xiao's heart. Perhaps, we could try it later? Forget the lie detector for now, it relies on brain waves. Otherwise, it's impossible to simply insert a metal needle into a person's head and measure neural electrical currents. Of course, brain waves are ultimately generated by electrical signals between neurons in the brain. Modern methods for detecting brain waves involve attaching electrodes directly to the scalp. And since they now possess room temperature superconductors, leveraging their zero resistance, this technology is a real possibility. Of course, for now, research on mechanical prosthetics and electronic eyes is clearly the best choice, as they both utilize artificial nerves to connect directly to the human body. For example, an electronic eye can be surgically connected to the optic nerve to achieve its function. The same principle applies to mechanical prosthetics, which are even easier to research than electronic eyes. Because the eye needs to process a large amount of image data, a more sophisticated chip will obviously be required, which requires chip design. Mechanical prosthetics, on the other hand, perform fewer functions. For example, a prosthetic leg only requires movement of the knee and ankle, and the nerve current processing data is relatively small, so high-precision chips are not required. A PCB board and some simple components are sufficient. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao immediately stood up and contacted someone. Prepare me titanium alloy for prosthetic limbs, and, after giving a series of instructions, Lin Xiao decided to spend the next few days creating several mechanical prosthetic limbs, especially arms. Compared to prosthetic legs, prosthetic hands are the most effective. Legs are basically only used for walking and supporting the body, while hands are the foundation of a person's labor force. Oh, and even if they are finally built, they will still need to be tested on animals. After thinking for a moment, Lin Xiao made another call. Get me another monkey. Well, I don't need it right now, just order it for me. Or the monkey I used last time, well, that monkey will be fine. After hanging up, Lin Xiao mentally apologized for the monkey. This time, he would probably have to remove one leg and one hand from the monkey. Of course, biological experimental animals are typically killed after testing. However, he had spared the monkey's life this time. After all, he hadn't conducted any drug or virus experiments on it, so according to the law, it could be allowed to live until it died of natural causes. He then stopped talking and waited for the necessary equipment to arrive. He also had to review the tutorials on amputation and prosthetic surgery. However, these things were just incidental. Lin Xiao hadn't forgotten that he had an academic presentation on the NS equations scheduled for mid-August. Time passed quickly, and August 15th finally arrived. On that day, the Great Hall of Shengjing University was once again packed, with over 2,000 seats filled. An academic presentation for both mathematics and physics had begun. Chapter 357 might stump Lin Xiao? Professor Pfefferman, you're here too. Of course I'm here, but Mr. Clay, why are you here too? At the entrance of the Peking University auditorium, Charles Pfefferman, who had flown in from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, was conversing with someone. This person was Thomas Clay, chairman of the board of the Clay Institute. The Clay Institute was a private research institution funded by a businessman named Landon Clay. Thomas Clay was a member of that businessman's family. The Millennium Prize problems were selected and announced by mathematicians organized by the Clay Institute. With a prize of $1 million per problem, the Clay Institute, founded in 1998, immediately gained widespread fame. So, having money is good. At this moment, Thomas Clay heard Pfefferman's question and smiled. After all, this is $1 million question. Of course I have to come and see it. Besides, last year, this Lin Xiao proved the Hodge conjecture, so I want to see if he can do it again. Pfefferman smiled and said, then I think you can prepare $2 million. Thomas Clay laughed. The second million will have to wait at least a year. After all, it needs at least a year for academic verification. It's precisely because Mr. Lin Xiao proved the Hodge conjecture that I came here. Such an important proof obviously requires a period of academic verification before it can be verified. For example, after Perelman proved the Poincaré conjecture in 2002, the Clay Institute didn't officially hold the award ceremony until 2010. Of course, Perelman didn't even attend. Pfefferman smiled and said, looks like you can finally give this prize out. Thomas Clay nodded and sighed. Yes, we can finally give it out. In 2010, they held a grand awards ceremony, but in the end, Perelman, the original winner, didn't want to come. This was a real embarrassment for the Clay Institute. All that hype, and in the end, the original winner didn't want the prize. Of course, since Perelman had turned down even the Fields Medal, his refusal of $1 million wasn't all that surprising. Unlike Perelman, Lin Xiao wasn't materialistic. He had accepted the Fields Medal himself, so he would definitely accept their award. So, Thomas Clay was already preparing to hold their first Millennium Prize ceremony, and even a second one. As a businessman, Thomas Clay understood the immense publicity this event would generate, which would then flow back into the family foundation. Thinking of this, Thomas Clay no longer waited and said with a smile, all right, Professor Pfefferman, let's go in now. We can look forward to Professor Lin Xiao's report. I probably won't understand it, so I'll have to wait for you to tell me the results later. Of course, no problem. Pfefferman smiled and nodded, then entered the auditorium with Thomas Clay. Along the way, they also encountered many well-known figures in the academic world, and Pfefferman continued to communicate with them. Hey, Wiles, you're a must-have for a place like this. Pfefferman, what do you mean I'm a must-have for a place like this? Nothing, eh? Faltings, you're here too. Since you're here, I can come too. I'm not too old to walk. Haha, that's good. Oh, Tao, you're here too. I've done some research on the Navier-Stokes equation before, and this time I'd like to hear how an even more talented person solved it. You call the work that played a key role in solving the Navier-Stokes equation just a little research? Well, I just know a little bit, okay. Greeting these renowned mathematicians along the way, Pfefferman parted ways with Thomas Clay and eventually reached his seat, which was also where guests from the Institute for Advanced Study gathered. Pfefferman, you're finally here. Seeing Pfefferman, the mathematicians and physicists from the Institute all greeted him. Pfefferman nodded to them all, then returned to his seat, smiling. Well, let's wait and see what surprises that genius will bring us. The others nodded in response, looking at the podium in front of them with anticipation. Although Lin Xiao was constantly reducing the scope of their research, after all, every mathematical problem he solved essentially negated all the previous work of others working on the same problem, his solutions always gave them a sense of sudden enlightenment. These conclusions or the methods he employed in the process provided crucial insights or inspiration, allowing them to continue their research, or even to explore new areas. This gave mathematicians a love-hate relationship with him. They also looked forward to Lin Xiao bringing them something new. And so, time passed quickly. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the lecture on the existence and smoothness of solutions to the Navier-Stokes equations officially began. The host took the stage, gathered the audience's attention, and then solemnly ushered out today's keynote speaker. Tap, 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 footsteps echoed from behind the podium, and Lin Xiao approached. Warm applause erupted, and everyone in the room turned their gazes on the stage. Lin Xiao, in his well-tailored suit, looked incredibly sharp, and everyone realized that this genius was actually quite a handsome man. His lush hair, however, made the many bald men in the audience envious. How could someone so brilliant have such healthy hair? Hello, friends from afar. Welcome to Shangjing University. Oh, quite a few old friends were here last year, and of course, there are some new ones too, and I welcome them all. Overall, I'm very happy to see you all here, Lin Xiao said with a smile. Looking at the crowd, many of whom he knew, he couldn't help but sigh. Although they weren't meeting at the same time, they were in the same auditorium. He was about to share his knowledge with the world once again. Well, as usual, let's not waste any more time on the nonsense and get straight to the point. A flat, rotating stone is thrown onto the water's surface. Then, Accompanied by ripples on the surface, the stone magically schemes the surface like a dragonfly. So, what happens when the water contacts the stone? What is the subsequent motion of the fluid? That's when we need to use the NS equations for analysis. With that, Lin Xiao opened his PowerPoint presentation and landed on the first page. Following Lin Xiao's opening remarks, the audience followed him and began to ponder this fluid mechanics problem. Now, let's assume that the density of the water, or fluid, is Greek letter ρ, its initial velocity v is 0, and u, v, and w are the velocity components of the fluid at point x, y, z, at time t. As Lin Xiao unfolded his explanation of the problem, everyone present had a variety of thoughts. Sig equals 1/2, uixj plus ujxi. The presentation gradually deepened, and some in the audience began to lapse into bewilderment. These individuals, like Thomas Gray, were essentially entrepreneurs with vested interests who had simply come to see Lin Xiao's proof gain the approval of these top mathematicians. Of course, due to the selective selection of attendees, a considerable number of people were able to understand. However, such a complex mathematical puzzle is ultimately only accessible to a small group of people, and eventually, more and more people became bewildered and lost. Then, Lin Xiao's presentation reached a key method he used to solve the problem, his Lin curvature tensor. As he spoke, the top mathematicians who remained in tune were once again amazed by this method. That's exactly how it feels. Just like the sieve method he used to prove the Goldbach conjecture, and the motivated cohomology in the Hodge conjecture. Every method he creates is filled with a profound ingenuity of the underlying thought. Pfefferman marveled. Pompiri smiled and said, haha, I saw it in his paper proving the existence of infinite primes in the Fibonacci sequence. The function he constructed there was a concept only a true genius could pull off. The same goes for the group transformation theory he later proposed in solving the Mersenne prime distribution, group transformation theory. Huh? I've been using it in my recent research, Deline said with a smile. The others nodded in agreement, and the physicist nearby echoed the sentiment. Just then, Pompiri suddenly turned to Pfefferman. By the way, Charles, I think you mentioned earlier that you have a question about Lin's proof. Pfefferman nodded, looking down at the paper in his hand. Yes, there's a crucial question. Then, he looked back up at Lin Xiao on the stage. Perhaps this question of mine will stump Lin Xiao. After all, I've been working on it for a long time and still can't figure out how to solve it. The others were instantly curious. Was Pfefferman also working on a problem he'd been working on for so long without a solution? They couldn't help but anticipate the moment when Pfefferman would ask that question. So they stopped talking and just looked at Lin Xiao on the stage quietly, waiting for his report to end. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358. Thank you for asking a fatal question. Time flew by. The paper was lengthy, and Lin Xiao's presentation was lengthy. In particular, after proposing Lin's curvature tensor method, he needed to apply the extensive computational processes involved. It took him a month to complete the entire process, and because this extremely complex calculation was essential, he had to spend considerable time explaining it in his presentation. In fact, many mathematicians who reviewed his proof had questions about this part, but after his explanation, they resolved their issues and couldn't help but marvel at Lin Xiao's ability to explain such a complex calculation so clearly. If Lin's curvature tensor was an astonishing invention, then this calculation was Lin Xiao's showcase. After all, everyone present could perform calculations, but the sheer volume and speed of this calculation were not always possible. The vast majority of them, if asked to explain it, would simply say, because this calculation is too long, I won't elaborate further. Obviously, saying so would compromise the integrity of the academic presentation. Lin Xiao's complete presentation of this section undoubtedly made it perfect. Even Terence Tao, sitting below, couldn't help but marvel. Lin Xiao is truly worthy of this guy. Even I find this calculation a bit of a headache just looking at it. It's truly impressive. As everyone marveled at this display of skill, more than 2 hours had already slipped by. Of course, the entire proof had finally come to an end. So, in summary, we can confirm that the solution to the NS equations exists, and it's smooth. We've now unveiled the first layer of the mystery of the NS equation solutions, revealing their fundamental properties. The momentum of every unit of fluid can be solved. They have patterns that can be controlled, and their final solution will hold the key to everything. In fact, it had already been mastered. Lin Xiao smiled, and then continued, of course, what the solution to the NS equation will look like still needs our continued exploration. This ultimate problem of classical physics has not yet been completely resolved in our hands, but I believe that we will eventually realize Leonardo da Vinci's dream, and the goals of many mathematicians and physicists will eventually be achieved by us. So, let us look forward to that day now. At this point, Lin Xiao also breathed a sigh of relief. Then I think my proof is over. Thank you everyone. Applause suddenly rang out, and everyone below applauded Lin Xiao and expressed their respect. Regardless of the final result, Lin Xiao spoke for more than 2 hours in one breath, which was considered quite serious. Then, as the applause stopped, Lin Xiao announced the next step. Well, let me challenge your questions next. There was laughter in the audience. A challenge? It looked like one. Of course, most of the people in these seats had been waiting for a long time. Soon, pairs of hands were raised. These mathematicians had been waiting for a long time. There were many more people asking questions this time than before. Because there were many people studying the NS equations, more or less they all had problems with Lin Xiao's proof. Then, Lin Xiao pointed out the questioners one by one and answered them. The first one was a professor from the International Institute of Mathematics at Shenzhen University. Lin Xiao left the first question to his own people. The professor asked, Professor Lin, based on your definition of f, t, x, on page 6, 2.1, you can deduce the general form of the identity, ft equals 0, but I want to know how you are going to solve the problem of system consistency. Lin Xiao smiled and said, good question. Then he picked up his paper, looked at it for a few seconds, then picked up the chalk and started writing on the blackboard next to him. First, let's look at the two algebraic identities I proposed in the paper's depth, f equals 0 and, through these two algebraic identities, we can easily get the following result, zdef ft equals 0. Therefore, we can get the constraints of the deformation tensor f, jfjkt depth, equals, a large number of complicated formulas appeared under Lin Xiao's pen, and the professor of mathematics from the University of Tokyo who asked the question followed Lin Xiao's train of thought and quickly understood how to answer his question. With an expression of sudden enlightenment, he smiled and said, thank you, Professor Lin, I understand, you're welcome. Lin Xiao smiled faintly, then continued to ask the next question. Asking questions is also a test of one's ability. The more skilled the mathematician, the more likely they are to ask more crucial questions, or rather, questions that directly address the most critical aspects of the proof. However, the mathematicians who were asking questions now were generally asking questions that they themselves were somewhat unclear about. So Lin Xiao quickly addressed all of them. And so, the number of people raising their hands gradually decreased, until finally, no one raised any more questions. Seeing that no one had raised a hand, Lin Xiao smiled faintly, assuming that no one had any questions, so he asked procedurally, does anyone have any questions? Seeing this, most of the people in the audience also assumed that there were no more questions, and they sighed inwardly. Lin Xiao had once again solved a famous mathematical problem. Miraculously, 2 of the 6 remaining Millennium Prize problems had been solved within 2 years. No, strictly speaking, the time difference was only a year. Just as these people were thinking this, Pfefferman in the front row finally raised his hand. A moment of silence fell. Is that Pfefferman? Terence Tao, sitting in the other row, recognized the mathematician who had raised his hand. His brows arched, then a smile broke into his lips. It seemed strange, then, that Charles Pfefferman didn't have any questions. I wonder how Lin Xiao will answer this. Terence Tao leaned back in his chair, his expression gazing at the spectacle. Lin Xiao, on the stage, was also slightly taken aback when he saw Pfefferman raise his hand. He knew Pfefferman, of course, after all, he had been among the mathematicians he had discussed with the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He also realized that this final question wouldn't be easy. Of course, no matter what it was, he would accept it. Professor Pfefferman, please ask. Charles Pfefferman smiled and said, hello, Professor Lin. Ever since I read your proof, I've been very happy, because it means I've finally found an answer to a question I've been pursuing for so long. Of course, before that, I have to ask you my last question. In studying the algebraic properties of the curvature tensor of a Riemann manifold, we can use the irreducible decomposition of the curvature tensor. This method also provides a powerful tool for analyzing irreducible bases and for determining the linear correlation of arbitrary Riemann polynomials. However, we all know that to solve the NS equations, we must use nonlinear methods. Professor Tao believes that this can be proved in the field. Everyone present looked at Terence Tao, the professor who knew a little bit about everything. His paper on the NS equations had inspired many mathematicians. Pfefferman glanced at Terence Tao, who was confused by the sudden cue, and chuckled in his heart. Who made Terence Tao say in front of him that he had studied a little bit just now. But then he went on to say to Lin Xiao, well, back to Professor Lin's part of the Lin curvature tensor theory. What I want to ask now is that you claim that this theory can describe those nonlinear manifolds. Then on page 34, part 4.3 of the paper, your method does not seem to show nonlinearity, but linearity, and then you completed your proof under linear conditions. So, I have a problem with this part of your answer. Have you found a way to unify linearity and nonlinearity? As Pfefferman posed the question, everyone present immediately grabbed their papers and flipped to page 34. This seemingly smooth argument, now illuminated by Pfefferman's presentation, had many in the room glancing at each other with sudden enlightenment. Even the professors from the Institute for Advanced Study standing beside Pfefferman stared wide-eyed. So that's the problem, SHH, unifying linear and nonlinearity? That's terrifying. Now, Lin Xiao must have truly hid a snag. Everyone looked up at Lin Xiao. This question, like finding his Achilles heel, had thrown the entire proof into jeopardy. Now, how could Lin Xiao solve it? To everyone's surprise, Lin Xiao showed no sign of panic. Instead, he looked a bit pleased, as if he'd finally been discovered. He smiled and said, ever since I wrote this procedure, I've been wondering if it was too subtle and wouldn't be noticed. But thankfully, Professor Pfefferman, you did. Thank you. Pfefferman and the others were immediately taken aback. Luckily, are you serious? You saw such a direct question as a stroke of luck, and you even worried that no one else would bring it up. Pfefferman, haha, you're welcome. Lin Xiao smiled calmly, then looked at everyone present and asked, but haven't you ever considered how linear and nonlinear can't be unified? Chapter 359 Lin's Program. Lin Xiao's words immediately drew expressions of disbelief from everyone present. Unifying linearity and nonlinearity? Most people only contemplated this question, or even considered it, let alone how to achieve it. Virtually no one considered it. To them, linearity and nonlinearity were distinct entities, with no possibility of intersecting. Just like fire and water cannot mix, or positive and negative electrons cannot coexist. And yet, Lin Xiao suddenly proposed this idea, and in front of so many people. Anyone else would have dismissed it as a joke, but it was Lin Xiao who said it. Charles Pfefferman's face was filled with surprise, and he even suspected he had misheard. Professor Lin, could you please repeat what you just said? Lin Xiao repeated, I said, perhaps linearity and nonlinearity can be unified. That is impossible. Lin Xiao laughed. Professor Pfefferman, in mathematics, some things are impossible because truth cannot be denied, like the irrational numbers that the Pythagoreans wanted to deny, but things that haven't yet become truth are possible, like the fact that linearity and nonlinearity cannot be unified. After all, we don't have any rigorous proof that linearity and nonlinearity cannot be unified. At this point, Lin Xiao smiled, picked up his chalk again, and continued writing on the blackboard. Professor Pfefferman, I can prove your question this way. As he spoke, Lin Xiao began to write. Here, since these second-order cubic quantities are identical, they must also remain invariant under even odd transformations, I equals I, AEI, BC, and now, it's obviously nonlinear, so we need to make it linear. To do that, we need to continue with the following transformation. As Lin Xiao spoke, everyone present stared intently at the equations he was calculating on the blackboard. How did Lin Xiao intend to seamlessly integrate the nonlinear aspects of his theory with the linear aspects? Once Lin Xiao achieved this, everyone present would realize that mathematics would be a major force in the future, one that would impact every field. Because that would mean that their world could be infinitely simplified. And so, as time passed, the content on the blackboard grew larger and more complex. By this point, the number of people who could understand it could be counted on 3 hands. Of course, the lecture was also being live-streamed, so many mathematicians were watching online. Even among those watching, a few top mathematicians could understand what was said, but only those top mathematicians. For example, Thomas Clay, chairman of the board of the Clay Institute, was completely bewildered. He couldn't help but shake his head and exclaim, "Oh my God, these mathematicians are crazy." Someone next to him laughed and said, "The mathematicians may not be crazy, but I think they think we are." "What do you mean?" Thomas Clay asked. The person next to him said, "Because they probably think we, a bunch of math-savvy monkeys, are crazy for coming to listen to a lecture like this." Thomas Clay was stunned for a moment, then shook his head with a laugh. That seemed quite reasonable. He wondered how his elder, Landon Clay, the patron of the Clay Institute, could have come up with the idea of establishing a mathematical institute and then solving a Millennium Prize-winning problem. It was completely incomprehensible. Of course, putting all that aside, the maneuver that Landon Clay had pulled off was undoubtedly the greatest he'd ever witnessed in his 20 years of experience. At the very least, their institute's reputation suddenly soared. At that moment, Lin Xiao on the stage paused. His right hand rested on his left elbow, his left hand on his chin, as he gazed at what he'd written on the blackboard, lost in thought. Those who had been watching Lin Xiao were puzzled. What was Lin Xiao doing? Hadn't he finished his argument yet? Suddenly, everyone wondered if he'd gone awry. However, no one spoke to interrupt him. They still had to show some respect. If Lin Xiao felt he couldn't handle it, he would surely let them know. Time ticked by, the audience of over 2,000 people simultaneously waiting to see what the genius on the stage would do next. Would he continue writing, shocking them, or give up and turn away in apology? But to everyone's surprise, Lin Xiao suddenly switched to another blackboard. Then, he continued writing on this one. His operation was completely different from what everyone expected. And what Lin Xiao wrote next was even more surprising. Wasn't it the polar coordinate formula? But everyone soon realized that Lin Xiao wasn't writing polar coordinates, or rather, a modified form of polar coordinates. What is Lin doing? Pfefferman, perplexed, watched from the seats below. Why did Lin Xiao suddenly start writing something else? But Pompiri, standing next to him, frowned. Lin wants to create a new coordinate system. A new coordinate system? Yes, Pompiri suddenly said. That's right. Whether in the Cartesian coordinate system or any other coordinate system, nonlinear lines can never become linear. That can't be changed, but perhaps changing the coordinate system can. So that's what Lin Xiao is doing now. Pfefferman was a little incredulous. Pompiri hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. Probably. I guess. Stop talking for now and watch Lin's process. At this moment, Deline interrupted them, scowling at Lin Xiao's next steps. Pfefferman and Pompiri looked over immediately, their expressions of surprise echoing. Lin Xiao had already completed the construction of this new coordinate system. He had also substituted the key function from Pfefferman's question into this coordinate system. Lin Xiao then performed a few more operations, and then, a magical scene occurred. The nonlinearity in Pfefferman's problem was magically transformed into a linear straight line in this coordinate system. In the audience, the top mathematicians sat up straight, their faces filled with amazement. Gerd Faltings, director of the Max Planck Institute for Mathematics and a leading mathematician, even half stood. Perhaps realizing there were other people in the audience, he sat back down. Even then, he couldn't help but mutter, "This is a magnificent achievement." His reaction stemmed from the immense importance he felt for this new coordinate system. The people around him were mostly confused, but seeing Faltings react like that and say those words, it undoubtedly proved that what Lin Xiao had suddenly created was of considerable importance. It was at this moment that Lin Xiao finally stopped writing, raised his head, and reviewed the process he had just gone through. Then he turned his head, faced everyone present, smiled and said, "Everyone, I am very lucky. I was originally going to use my old method to complete the proof of Professor Pfefferman's problem, but now I accidentally discovered a new method, that is, as you can see, this new coordinate system, and I think I can now call this coordinate system an absolute linear coordinate system. According to the basic lemma and several basic postulates I gave, in this coordinate system, there is only linearity, no nonlinearity. However, obviously, you have also seen that my lemma only fits the scope of the problem I am exploring now. If you want to extend it to all fields, you still need to prove the generalization of these lemmas and postulates. Then, as long as these lemmas and postulates are generalized and the final proof is completed, from then on, Our nonlinear world will be simplified into simple straight lines, and the gap between linearity and nonlinearity will be completely bridged. Having said that, Lin Xiao took a deep breath and looked at the dazed audience. He did not expect that he would suddenly discover such a coordinate system. He had briefly considered the unification of linear and nonlinear theory, a concept underlying his discussion of the Lin curvature tensor. However, the method he originally employed was relatively basic, far less convenient than the current absolute linear coordinate system. As a result, this sudden discovery of a theory allowed him to take the first step toward unifying linear and nonlinear theory. Finally, gathering his feelings, he continued, "Well, that's basically it. Professor Pfefferman, I think I've addressed your question. Do you have any further questions?" Pfefferman, still absorbed in the absolute linear coordinate system Lin Xiao had created, was brought back to his senses by Lin Xiao's question. I have no more questions," Pfefferman said to Lin Xiao. But then, returning his gaze to the coordinates Lin Xiao had provided, he exclaimed in astonishment, "Lin, your talent is truly formidable. Langlands proposed his Langlands program, and now I believe yours will become the world's, oh, no, it should be the world's Lin program." Chapter 360 Mathematics Level 7. Lin's program. Pfefferman's words shocked everyone in the room, followed by a feeling of disbelief. The Langlands program stands as a guiding star in mathematics, paving the way for a grand unified theory. And now, could the absolute linear coordinate system proposed by Lin Xiao also become such a guiding star? Pfefferman even described it as belonging to the world. However, considering the significance of the absolute linear coordinate system, it makes sense. As Lin Xiao had just said, the unification of linear and nonlinearity would simplify everything. For example, stock investing would become simpler, as would financial investment. And, most importantly, technological research and development would also become simpler. In the future, even the development of curvature drives would become incredibly simple. Curvature drives operate by altering the curvature of spacetime, straightening curved space into a straight line, thereby enabling spacecraft to travel at speeds exceeding the speed of light. The absolute linear coordinate system would be able to infinitely simplify all the mathematical problems involved. From a more macroscopic perspective, the world's development has always been nonlinear, winding and full of twists and turns. There may be periods of rapid growth and periods of stagnation, but the stagnation phases are clearly the majority. If nonlinearity and linearity were unified, the world's development would become a continuously upward straight line, without any stagnation. From a less than level 1 cosmic civilization, it would progress to level 1, level 2, and finally level 3, and so on. Unless Earth civilization encounters an attack from a more powerful civilization before it develops, causing its sudden demise, or encounters a catastrophe like the extinction of the dinosaurs before it breaks free, Earth civilization is destined to become the dominant force in the universe. At this moment, everyone in the auditorium of Shengjing University was pondering these ideas. Those with the more vivid imaginations even envisioned Earth civilization breaking through dimensional barriers and achieving a higher dimension. At this moment, Lin Xiao finally spoke. He smiled and said, "Professor Pfefferman, thank you for the compliment. Indeed, I also believe that once the absolute linear coordinate system can be extended to all fields, it will bring tremendous benefits to the development of our Earth civilization. However, obviously, we can't think about such unrealistic things now. I wonder if my absolute linear coordinate system can be extended. I think this is like another P equals NP problem. Until now, most people in our academic community still don't believe P equals NP. Perhaps in the future, my absolute linear coordinate system will also be judged impossible." Lin Xiao's words brought those who were caught up in the phenomenon back to their senses, and they fell into deep thought. Yes, no matter what Lin Xiao proposed was still a bit too incredible. Could it really be established? For now, no one knew. Pfefferman, however, remained unfazed. Instead, he smiled and said, "Regardless, Mr. Lin, your argument has already deeply moved me. Right now, I sincerely hope that your absolute linear coordinate system can be realized. After all, it will bring about a leap forward in the development of our civilization." He paused, then continued with a smile, "Then, my questions are all gone. Anyway, let me congratulate you. Our millennium problem, at least for now, has been solved. As for what happens next, we'll leave it to the mathematical community to slowly explore." He then extended his hands and clapped. Clap, clap, Clap. Led by Pfefferman, the others also awoke, applauding. Despite Lin Xiao's subsequent proposal of absolute linear coordinates and the seemingly incredible unification of linear and nonlinearity, it's important to remember that the main theme of this presentation was Lin Xiao's proof of the existence and smoothness of solutions to the NS equations. Clearly, Lin Xiao had answered everyone's questions, including Pfefferman's crucial one. Therefore, there was no doubt that Lin Xiao's proof was essentially flawless. As for whether or not someone would discover the flaw later, it was highly unlikely. After all, his proof had been discussed by the mathematical community for nearly a month, and then subjected to scrutiny by so many people at this conference. Therefore, the likelihood of finding any flaws was already very low. To bring up the Wiles incident again, Wiles's errors were only pointed out after his presentation because he hadn't published a paper first, making them obvious 2 years later. Therefore, virtually no one considered whether someone would later point out the flaws in Lin Xiao's proof. Lin Xiao, observing the resounding applause, smiled. It's finally over. He then bowed slightly to the audience. Well, that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for your patience in listening to the end. Thank you. With that, the applause intensified, and Lin Xiao turned and left, returning to the backstage area. However, upon returning to the somewhat quiet backstage, the system's voice suddenly chimed in his mind. He was startled. What was the system going to say now? He hadn't done anything, had he? Congratulations, host. Through a combination of coincidence and strength, you've discovered the motivation for unifying linear and nonlinear phenomena. You've found a shortcut to the truth, although achieving this shortcut will be extremely difficult. However, please continue your efforts, because regardless of whether you can achieve the shortcut, unifying linear and nonlinear phenomena is essential for ultimately finding the truth. Reward: 10,000 math experience points. Congratulations, host. Your math level has reached level 7, 6,000/60,000. Upon hearing this, Lin Xiao's face lit up with surprise. How could this be possible? He hadn't expected to receive such a reward for simply proposing a question. He hadn't even received a reward when he first proposed the Lin conjecture. And now, he'd directly received 10,000 math experience points. While it was only experience points, not even truth points, it was still a truly unexpected surprise. Of course, successfully reaching level 7 was even more of a surprise. How powerful would level 7 mathematics be? He was eagerly anticipating it. At that moment, he felt a slight warming in his head, a familiar sensation, evidently the arrival of his much-anticipated brain development. Math had reached level 7, boosting his brain development by 0.8%, bringing it directly to 11.45%. Of course, the increased brain development now hardly burdened him, so all he felt now was the experience of strengthening. As this feeling of strength faded, he nodded in satisfaction. Yes, he was now at that terrifying level. Furthermore, his increased math skills had also made him more sensitive to numbers. He looked around and saw he was reading all sorts of data. He could even read a full A4 sheet of paper and count the number of words and punctuation marks in a single second. If that wasn't terrifying enough, what was? Lin Xiao felt even more satisfied. But then, a voice suddenly rang out from the side. Professor Lin, academician Lin. He came back to his senses and turned to look. They were some math professors from Kyoto University, along with several top mathematicians. There was also a foreigner he didn't recognize, whose face didn't look like a math major. He knew all the math professors from Kyoto University, of course, including the one who had first asked him the question. And those top mathematicians were naturally Fields medalists. Lin Xiao smiled. Everyone, why are you backstage? Hey, we can't wait to see you, Deline said with a smile. It's my honor. Terence Tao also smiled and said, Lin Xiao, how was it? How does it feel to have proved the Millennium Problem? Lin Xiao rubbed his chin. It's not that difficult, actually. I've already proved it once. Terence Tao was stunned for a moment, then a look of resignation crossed his face. He shrugged and said, You're worthy of me. Pfefferman burst into laughter at this. Everyone around him was stunned by his joy. What was going on? Tao also looked bewildered. After Pfefferman finished laughing, he patted Tao on the shoulder, but remained silent. He then turned to Lin Xiao and asked, Lin, actually, I'd like to ask you, what are your thoughts on your absolute linear coordinate system? Upon hearing this question, The others stopped paying attention to Pfefferman's laughter and turned to Lin Xiao, eager to understand his thoughts. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said, "My opinion is that linearity and nonlinearity can definitely be unified." He said this because the system's previous words clearly implied that linearity and nonlinearity can be unified. Since the system had stated this, he could naturally make this conclusion. Upon hearing Lin Xiao's response, the others nodded slightly. They all hoped that this unification was possible. From a purely mathematical perspective, unifying the two would undoubtedly be etched in the annals of mathematical history. However, even just thinking about it seemed too far off. At this moment, the foreigner, whom Lin Xiao didn't know, smiled and said, "Well, distinguished mathematicians, let's leave this problem for later study. Mr. Lin, let me introduce myself. I'm Thomas Clay, chairman of the board of directors of the Clay Institute. Regarding your proof of the Hodge conjecture, the Millennium Prize-winning problem, I was wondering if we could discuss our awards ceremony." Lin Xiao was stunned. He didn't expect this person to be the chairman of the board of directors of the Clay Institute, but then he smiled and said, "Are you coming to China to hold this awards ceremony?" "Of course I can discuss it." Thomas Clay was stunned. "What? Coming to China to hold this ceremony?" Chapter 361, Mojiao? Steamed bun with meat? Mr. Lin, coming to the State Council in China, this might not be possible. Thomas Clay's face showed an embarrassment. As a businessman, his objectives naturally followed business principles. While the Clay Institute was non-profit, the Clay family had more than just a research institution, they also had their own family business. For example, the founder of the Clay Institute, Landon Clay, was once the chairman of the renowned financial firm Eat Advance. The profits from their family business also supported the maintenance of the Clay Institute. Therefore, this Millennium Awards ceremony would be an opportunity for them to invite prominent figures from various industries. After all, such a grand event in mathematics would undoubtedly bring together many renowned mathematicians, and such talented mathematicians would naturally attract many from the business community. Their family business was a wealth management business, so perhaps it could attract many wealthy individuals to entrust their funds to them for safekeeping. Thomas Clay had already made plans for this. However, Lin Xiao's sudden announcement of holding the awards ceremony in China threw a wrench in his plans. If it were really held in China, who could he invite? The vast majority of those wealthy individuals would surely be unwilling to come. Inviting wealthy individuals from China? That's a tough sell. Seeing Thomas Clay's embarrassment, Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, "I'm very sorry, Mr. Clay. Personal reasons prevent me from traveling to the United States, so I probably won't be able to attend the award ceremony." Thomas Clay was immediately incredulous. Lin Xiao really wasn't going? It was $1 million. While $1 million might be worth less today than when the Millennium Prize problem was first proposed, it was still $1 million, and no one could deny that it was still a significant value. Everyone else present was also surprised. Perhaps only the mathematics professors at Peking University remained silent, finding it perfectly normal. Lin Xiao had already suffered an accident in China, let alone abroad. Who knew how long it would take them to hear his obituary? At this point, Lin Xiao also expressed a reluctance to continue the conversation. He said, "All right, everyone, let's not discuss anything else. We've been talking for over 2 hours. Since you've all come from abroad, I'll do my best to be a good host and treat you all to a meal. What would you like?" Speaking of food, Deline immediately said, "Take me to try your mojiao. I want the authentic kind. I've been in Beijing for a few days and haven't had it yet." Yes, mojiao. Come to think of it, I'd like to try it too." Papyri nodded beside him. Lin Xiao was stunned. "Mojiao? Oh, could you please say it again? I didn't hear clearly." "It's mojiao," Deline repeated. The more he spoke, the more difficult it seemed to pronounce the Chinese accent. Lin Xiao scratched his head. He still didn't understand what this mojiao was. The other mathematicians present at the University of Beijing were also bewildered, still unable to grasp what they were talking about. Seeing this, Lin Xiao, forced to unleash his 11.45% brain power, began searching for the exact substance. Luckily, being from Qin province, he finally realized that what they meant by mojiao, a steamed bun with meat, was actually referring to their province's most delicious snack. Rojiamo, a meat-filled bun. He was immediately amused and said, "You're talking about rojiamo, a meat-filled bun, right? This isn't a steamed bun with meat. In China, we call it ro GMO, a meat-filled bun. Deline and Pumpiri immediately looked incredulous. Excuse me? Ro GMO, that doesn't make sense. It's clearly a bun with meat inside, right? Several other foreign mathematicians nearby also expressed confusion. How can meat be sandwiched between a bun? Is it like a KFC tucker, a large fried chicken cutlet wrapped in a bun? How is that supposed to be eaten? Seeing these world-class mathematicians, all with a look of curious babies, Lin Xiao felt even more amused. So he gave them a good popular science explanation. Strictly speaking, it is called rao giamo because it means meat-filled steamed bun. Giamo is a noun, and gia is not a verb. After his explanation, these people finally showed expressions of sudden enlightenment. Even the mathematics professors from Kyoto University showed expressions of enlightenment, because they didn't know what was going on. Seeing this, Lin Xiao shook his head with a smile, and then said, "Okay, let's go, everyone, let's go eat now, okay?" Everyone nodded and left. As for Thomas Clay, although he wanted to say something more, he ultimately gave up. He had guessed what Lin Xiao's so-called personal reasons were, but he couldn't do anything about it. After all, his last name wasn't Morgan, Rockefeller, or Rothschild. So, he could only watch Lin Xiao leave with a sigh. And so, Lin Xiao's academic presentation on proving the existence and smoothness of solutions to the NS equation, one of the 7 great mathematical problems of the millennium, concluded successfully. Of the 7 most valuable world-class mathematical problems selected by Earth in 2000, only 4 remained. However, while one problem had been solved, another had been added after the presentation. That was the feasibility of the generalized absolute linear coordinate system. In a narrow sense, this referred to the coordinate system Lin Xiao had proposed on the spot. Because its conditions only applied to the problem he had solved, it was generally unusable and could only be used to solve other similar problems. The generalized absolute linear coordinate system, on the other hand, was applicable to all fields. Since the lecture, this issue has spread directly to all major fields around the world. The level of discussion is relatively lower than that of the original multidimensional field theory. After all, it involves 2 relatively professional terms, linearity and nonlinearity, which are less attractive than the science fiction term multidimensional space. Of course, when it comes to science fiction, the world described by linearity and nonlinearity is still quite interesting, so this is one of the reasons why it has attracted the attention of many netizens. Wow, academician Lin can come up with anything. Unifying linearity and nonlinearity is terrifying. What is the P equals NP problem? If you don't understand, just ask, what does the P equals NP problem mean? Those who understand will understand, and those who don't understand are not convenient to explain to you. I can only say that those who understand will understand. I don't believe that linearity and nonlinearity can be unified. Our world is so colorful because it is nonlinear. If it were linear, it would be too monotonous. You seem to have made a mistake. It's not like the world will change from nonlinear to linear after proving this problem. The world is still nonlinear, but all the nonlinear problems we encounter can be directly converted into linear situations for analysis. What the above person said is right. In fact, in previous scientific research, the nonlinear problems encountered were basically approximated as linear models for study. The only problem is how to convert them. The most important thing is that it is difficult to convert. Even if it is converted, it is only an approximation. But what Lin Xiao proposed is equivalent to giving us a format converter that can perfectly convert all nonlinear problems into linear problems. There is no approximation. It will be very helpful for our scientific research in all aspects of life. Why do I feel like what you said is that linear problems are very simple? I always can't understand linear algebra. You talk like you are a mathematician. The explosion belongs to it. Wisdom tooth extraction in Henan. The things that Lin Xiao comes up with are getting more and more outrageous. There are multidimensional field theories and the unification of linear and nonlinear. It feels like he has traveled back from the future. Brothers, I'm out again. I've already told you Lin Xiao is an alien, but you still don't believe me. I'll say it again. Lin Xiao is I. What's wrong, brother? Brother, have you been arrested again? It's over. Barbecue is gone. This brother is gone again. The topic of the unification of linear and nonlinearity has been discussed for a long time. Professionals discuss professional topics, while non-experts discuss science fiction. Some even say they would create a novel based on the final formula for unifying linear and nonlinearity. The story is about Earth being captured by aliens, and the protagonist accidentally learns the formula from the aliens, then escapes from the alien spaceship, and finally uses this formula to secretly develop, becoming a prominent figure in the alien civilization and ultimately gaining supreme power. Of course, this is beside the point. Lin Xiao didn't pay much attention to it. After the report, he returned to his normal life. He also tried to study the absolute linear coordinate system, which is now also called the Lin coordinate system in academia, just like the Cartesian plane rectangular coordinate system. Apparently, the system's initial prediction that this shortcut would be difficult to take was entirely correct, because once he got it, he felt completely lost. Ultimately, he gave up and turned his attention back to his previous research, robotic prostheses. A robotic right arm and left leg for the monkey were almost complete, and the monkey Lin Xiao had used to experiment with artificial nerves was also ready. Lin Xiao was already looking forward to seeing what a cyberpunk monkey wielding a robotic prosthesis would look like. Chapter 362 Mechanical Ascension? Basically, it should look like this. Lin Xiao looked at the design on the computer, a thoughtful look on his face. Naturally, the monkey's prosthetic limb needed to be designed first. He had already designed a model based on the proportions of unlucky monkey number 1. Well, Lin Xiao had named that monkey unlucky monkey number 1. This was also to prepare for the possibility of number 2, number 3, and so on. He had already designed a model based on the proportions of unlucky monkey number 1's right arm and left leg. Next came the issue of the internal structure. The legs were simple, with few joints and no need for toe joints for movement, making them easy to create. The arms, however, were more complex, requiring numerous motors. Perfectly accommodating these motors would require meticulous design. Another important point was the sense of touch. While the feet might not need tactile sensation, the hands definitely do. Tactile sensation is crucial for humans. For example, a novelist needs to be able to type without looking at the keyboard. Typing without looking at the keyboard requires tactile feedback, otherwise, fingers would constantly make accidental touches, which would obviously be a major problem for typing. The problem of achieving a sense of touch is relatively simple. For the human hand, the most important tactile points are the fingertips and palms. Simply adding pressure sensors to these key locations would achieve this. Beyond these issues, there's one final problem: energy. That is, batteries. Lin Xiao recalled that lithium-ion batteries still dominate the battery market today. However, their energy density is already insufficient, especially for prosthetic limbs. Of course, a removable battery structure would suffice. Using 2 batteries a day would maintain battery life. Furthermore, lithium-ion batteries are relatively unsafe. Given the numerous reports of fires and even explosions, a quick disassembly mechanism, or even an automatic release mechanism, would be necessary to prevent any danger to users of these prosthetic limbs. Lin Xiao shook his head, feeling somewhat frustrated, but there was no point dwelling on it now. At least current lithium-ion batteries are relatively safe. Those produced by major manufacturers rarely experience dangerous accidents. By carefully screening the batteries they select, they can generally avoid such problems. In short, these are the things you need to pay attention to when manufacturing this mechanical prosthesis. Forget all this nonsense. Let's just build it first. With this thought, Lin Xiao stopped dwelling on his thoughts. He then headed to the Research Institute's workshop, which primarily focuses on mechanical research and development. This workshop boasted machine tools, an electric arc furnace, and other equipment, such as polishers. It was a well-equipped facility, the dream workshop of any mechanical enthusiast. Now that he had all the materials, the only thing left was the final construction. Let's get started. Donning various protective gear, Lin Xiao began his work. First, he heated the aluminum alloy to a high temperature. Aluminum alloy is lightweight, making it suitable for the prosthetic's main structure. Most importantly, it's also flexible. Then, he coated it with a layer of silicone to simulate skin, resulting in a perfect finish. Once the aluminum alloy was red hot, Lin Xiao picked up his hammer and began hammering. Anyone who saw Lin Xiao, a top mathematician and physicist, engaging in such ironwork would likely be shocked. But for Lin Xiao, as a man, the urge to personally create machinery always came naturally. He quickly constructed the outer shell and other components according to the blueprints. Thanks to his precision, the shells matched his design to within a mere 10 microns. With the outer shell finished, He prepared various wires and the PCB he had previously designed. This PCB would connect to the artificial nerve, transmitting and receiving electrical currents. This step, connecting the external circuitry with the internal circuitry, was the most crucial step. According to the neural current interpretation book awarded by the system, the bioelectrical and non-biological currents would be perfectly integrated. Time passed quickly. After another 10 days, Lin Xiao finally completed all the work. A sturdy leg and a slightly thicker arm, relatively large compared to Unlucky Monkey No. 1's legs and arms, though the size was to accommodate more batteries. Of course, in addition to the legs and arms, there were two other components that connected the prosthetic limb to the human body, much like the part of the Winter Soldier's robotic arm in the Marvel movies that remained attached to his shoulder after being removed. These two components facilitated the arm's subsequent disassembly for maintenance. Finally done, Lin Xiao examined the arm, a satisfied expression on his face. Well, even if the Winter Soldier's robotic arm was lost and they came to him, he could build a similar one. Well, it's time to let Unlucky Monkey No. 1 experience what it's like to be a cyberpunk monkey. Lin Xiao's lips curled up, and he pulled out his phone to arrange for the live animal lab at the biology lab and for his monkey to be transported there. Then, he gathered his supplies and headed to the lab, the same lab where he'd created the artificial nerve. Upon entering, Lin Xiao saw a monkey sitting in a familiar cage. Upon seeing him, the monkey began to squeak, its face shimmering with fear, as if shouting, "Don't come near me." Clearly, it hadn't forgotten the demon who had stabbed it. Lin Xiao smiled, stepped forward, and said, "Hey, don't be afraid. I'm not some demon. This time, I'm letting you experience mechanical ascension, something many of us humans crave. Don't be ungrateful." The monkey continued to squeak. What on earth do you think it knows about mechanical ascension? If it were human, Lin Xiao's expression would undoubtedly resemble that of a wicked scientist conducting human experiments. Seeing the monkey's uncooperative expression, Lin Xiao spread his hands. "You're not going to say anything? Then there's no point in saying anything." Without further ado, he stepped forward, took out a syringe of anesthetic, and, controlling the monkey, injected it. The monkey then wore a look of despair and fell into deep sleep. Lin Xiao stopped talking and placed it on the test bench. He then recalled his long-standing training in amputation and prosthetic surgery, and began to work. First, this wasn't just a one-shot operation. Since it was a neurosurgery procedure, he naturally needed to protect the nerves within. He picked up a scalpel and slowly began to cut. With his meticulous excision, he successfully preserved the monkey's brachial plexus. Next, he installed the shoulder arm connector. This required bone screws, which were driven directly into the bone. And then the connector was installed. For this step, Lin Xiao immediately took out his electric drill. If the monkey suddenly woke up now, it would probably regret it, recalling the terrifying feeling of the doctor using a hammer to bang on the monkey during a wisdom tooth extraction. And so the operation continued. 6 hours later, after installing the final robotic leg, Lin Xiao finally wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the monkey before him. The once hairy right arm and left leg were now remarkably replaced with metallic robotic prostheses. The mechanical hand, in particular, had distinct metal joints, imbued with a strong sense of machinery and science fiction. Seeing this, Lin Xiao even wondered if they might not even need the skin-mimicking silicone layer anymore. Looking at the shape of the robotic arm, who would want to replace it? No wonder the concept of robotic ascension was so popular. He couldn't even rule out the possibility that some disparate individuals would simply remove their own arms and replace them with these robotic arms. He couldn't help but marvel at the sight, then shook his head, dismissing any such speculation. If such a madman truly existed, there was nothing he could do. After all, he couldn't stop those seeking their own death. He then placed a monkey in a cage and waited for it to wake up, to see if it could operate its two robotic prostheses. Time passed quickly, and after another hour, the effects of the anesthetic began to wear off. Lin Xiao stared intently at the monkey's body. First, the monkey's left fingers moved. Its left hand was intact, so the problem wasn't serious. But then, Lin Xiao saw its right fingers move too. One of the mechanical fingers actually began to twitch. Lin Xiao's face lit up with surprise. Did it work? At this moment, the monkey's right arm also began to move. Perhaps because of the surgery, and after the anesthetic wore off, the pain was unbearable, causing the monkey to twitch. However, This scene proved that Lin Xiao's mechanical prosthesis was a success. Then, as time passed, the anesthetic wore off, and the monkey finally sat up. It initially covered its surgical site to ease the pain, but was shocked to find that its familiar arm and leg had changed. Fear filled its expression, and it began to jump up and down in its cage. But after a while, it calmed down again, its fear giving way to confusion and curiosity, and it began to touch its new arm and leg. Seeing this, Lin Xiao smiled. Success. Just then, his phone suddenly rang. It was Ma Gaolian. After he answered, Ma Gaolian's laughter echoed from the other end. Academician Lin, I have good news for you. Guess what it is? Lin Xiao laughed and said, don't worry about your good news for now. Your good news is definitely not as good as mine, so guess what my news is? I'll take tomorrow off. That's all for today. Chapter 363 Warming Up the Outside World. Ma Gaolian, who had been chuckling and waiting for Lin Xiao to guess, was stunned by Lin Xiao's words. What? Lin Xiao has even better news? Why did Lin Xiao suddenly have good news again? Wait. Ma Gaolian's eyes suddenly lit up on the other end of the line. Are you kidding? Lin Xiao is saying he has good news. This is good news from Academician Lin. Ma Gaolian's voice immediately rose, and he asked expectantly, Academician Lin, what's the good news? Forget about guessing, I'm sure I can't guess. Lin Xiao smiled and said, I'll take a picture and send it to you. He then took a picture of unlucky monkey number 1, oh, now cyber monkey number 1, and sent it directly to Ma Gaolian. Ma Gaolian, on the other end, was stunned when he saw the picture. Although he had seen this monkey before, when Lin Xiao had demonstrated the functions of artificial nerves, he clearly wasn't able to distinguish between different monkeys, so he didn't recognize it. However, the two mechanical prosthetic limbs in the photo left Ma Gaolian stunned. This. Academician Lin, could this good news you're talking about be this, realistic level special effects? He asked cautiously, trying to be discreet. Although he had a suspicion, it still felt a little unreal. After all, after Lin Xiao had developed artificial nerves, he had asked if prosthetic limbs could be made. But hadn't Lin Xiao clearly said at the time that this thing was difficult to make? He had said that the meaning expressed by the neural currents was difficult to translate, and even if it was created, it wouldn't be stable. And now, suddenly, it had been developed again, which seemed absurd to him. Upon hearing Ma Gaolian's speculation, Lin Xiao was speechless. Director Ma, be more confident. What movie special effects? I don't have the time to help domestic films develop brand new special effects technology. Forget it, I'll just send you a video. He then took out his phone, filmed the monkey, and sent it to Ma Gaolian. Ma Gaolian quickly opened the video and started watching. The more he watched, the wider his eyes widened. Seeing the monkey flexibly moving its two mechanical prosthetic limbs, it was clear to him that this wasn't some sci-fi clip, it was something Lin Xiao had filmed for him. Metallic reflections shone on the surface of the prosthetic limbs. Finally, Ma Gaolian swallowed and spoke into the phone again. Academician Lin, is this really a mechanical prosthesis? How could it be fake? Lin Xiao laughed. Didn't you say back then that interpreting neural currents was a crucial issue? That it would take a long time to complete? Now it's only a few months, Lin Xiao said calmly. I accidentally discovered a way to interpret neural currents. Now, besides simulating brain thought and achieving artificial consciousness by controlling neural currents, I've also achieved everything else. For example, I've developed an electronic prosthetic eye, and now I can interpret visual neural currents as well. What? Visual neural currents? Ma Gaolian was shocked again, his expression moved. Blindness, deafness, and muteness are all deeply tragic, but if he had to become one of these three disabilities, he would definitely exclude the blind first. Because neither the deaf nor the mute has lost their mobility. What they lack is the ability to integrate into society, but they still have some ability to participate in the world. After all, they can still see. For the blind, however, the world is pitch black. While they still have the ability to communicate, they have lost the ability to participate in the world. When people are unable to integrate into the world, the pain they ultimately feel, at least in Ma Gaolian's opinion, is even more devastating than the other two types. He himself simply cannot accept being blind. Furthermore, there are even more devastating types among the blind, those born blind. For them, they don't even know what color is. They have no concept of color, not even the color black. For such people, even with the ability to speak, Learning to communicate can be fraught with difficulty. Even Helen Keller, author of 3 Days to See, at least saw the world and had a basic understanding of its composition and colors. Therefore, if, as Lin Xiao claims, his technology can truly realize this electronic prosthetic eye, it will be a benefit to all of humanity, just like artificial nerves. Of course, he hasn't forgotten the other uses for mechanical prostheses. Adding these factors to the equation, Lin Xiao's discount technology is a combination of a living huatuo, a living bionic, and so on. Crucially, once these technologies emerge, China's position in the global medical field will be significantly elevated. What technology in the world could restore sight to the blind? Thinking of this, Ma Gaolian's excitement intensified, and he immediately said, "Academician Lin, I understand. So, when will this technology be available?" Lin Xiao replied, "Electronic prosthetic eyes require a longer time, but not too long. They primarily require specialized chip design. Of course, they don't need to be extremely sophisticated, a 90-nanometer process will suffice. The computational analysis will be the primary focus. A normal human eye has hundreds of millions of cells processing light information, ultimately forming numerous images. Decoding this light information for an electronic prosthetic eye naturally requires a significant amount of computing power. Complex computations and interpretation of the resulting images are required, ultimately converting them into neural electrical signals for processing by the brain. Therefore, chips are needed for this computation. As for a mechanical prosthesis, I think it could be used right now. Aside from the artificial nerve that needs to connect to the human nerve, the rest of the surgery isn't particularly difficult. It's just a matter of driving a few bone screws into the skeleton and stabilizing it with the external structure, which shouldn't be a problem. And since the artificial nerve has been tested for months and proven flawless, I think it could be used, too. After all, it's primarily a mechanical structure. Current technology certainly makes it possible. Given someone with a broken leg or arm, and based on their body type, he could design a prosthesis and begin constructing it. It wouldn't take long at all. Ma Gaolian was stunned and asked, "So, you performed the surgery on this monkey all by yourself?" "Yes, Ma Gaolian. This is pure cheating, even more than cheating. How could surgery be that easy? Not to mention connecting nerves and inserting bone screws. It sounds difficult enough, and yet, in Lin Xiao's words, inserting bone screws seemed simple? It was outrageous." However, Lin Xiao didn't dwell on Ma Gaolian's concerns. He immediately said, "Okay, Director Ma, that's basically it. I'll trouble you to arrange the rest." Ma Gaolian regained his composure and quickly said, "Okay, no problem," but just as he finished speaking, he remembered something. "Oh, right, I haven't told you about my good news yet." Lin Xiao smiled and said, "It should be that the artificial nerve has been approved and is officially available for market." "Right, you knew?" "I guessed," Lin Xiao said casually. "Since it's on the market, it will be easier for me to use this technology directly." Ma Gaolian was helpless, feeling increasingly overwhelmed by Lin Xiao's intelligence. "Okay, then. Although this mechanical prosthesis can be used right now, we definitely need to test it beforehand. I'll arrange for a few people to conduct the tests as soon as possible." "Okay, no problem, right. One more question," Ma Gaolian suddenly asked quietly. "The torque of this thing, the motor, how much can it reach?" Lin Xiao was stunned, then he understood what Ma Gaolian meant by this question. The torque of the motor directly affects the strength of the robotic arm. This means that if it's made into a prosthetic leg or hand, it determines whether it's a rehabilitation device or a weapon. This is also known as mechanical ascension. Lin Xiao immediately replied, "It can achieve as much torque as the motor can." Ma Gaolian's eyes suddenly lit up. "Okay, I understand. Thank you, Academician Lin." Lin Xiao reminded him, "Of course, this is only theoretical. After all, this thing is always connected to the human skeleton. The ultimate force also needs to take into account the bearing capacity of the connection, so there are still some limitations." Ma Gaolian smiled and said, "I know that." "Okay." Lin Xiao said nothing more and hung up the phone. Shaking his head, Lin Xiao sighed. Is this really the start of the cyberpunk and mecha ascension era? In the history books of the future, it will be written, in 2023, Lin Xiao developed Earth's first mechanical prosthetic limb, foreshadowing the future cyberpunk world. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao couldn't help but laugh and shook his head. He stopped thinking about it and took another look at the monkey before him. He couldn't help but wonder, if I let this thing out, Who knows how surprised the outsiders would be? Then he thought, maybe it's okay. It's a good opportunity to warm up the outside world. With this thought, a smile suddenly appeared on Lin Xiao's face. Chapter 364. Can I see it? Holy shit, look at that. In the hallway of the biological laboratory at the Dingguang Research Institute, many researchers stared in shock at the cage next to their respected director Lin. Inside the cage was a monkey. Monkeys weren't unusual, as the researchers present had seen and even handled numerous cadavers before. But the most striking thing was that the monkey's entire right arm and left leg were made of metal. The metallic sheen they shone on them made everyone present wonder if they had traveled through time. And that wasn't the most significant thing. The most significant thing was that these two metal prosthetic limbs moved with remarkable flexibility. The fingers, knees, and elbows, for example, all moved, as if the metal had come alive. Furthermore, the grinding sound of the motors as these joints moved made them even more disbelieving. What the hell, a mechanical monkey? Lin. Academician Lin, what's going on with this monkey? Someone finally couldn't help but ask. Lin Xiao smiled and said, it lost an arm and a thigh, so I replaced them with two brand new ones. If the monkey had understood, it would have screamed in anger, but the people present didn't think much of it. For biological experiments, such as testing for viruses and bacteria, or conducting drug trials, the integrity of the animal's limbs is generally not a priority. This also results in a much lower price, or perhaps even the one in a buy 10 get one free deal. Director, we know this is new. Your new one, isn't it a little too new? It's way out of its time, the others exclaimed. Some even doubted their own eyes. Academician Lin, is this monkey real? Of course it's real, Lin Xiao said, placing a finger in front of unlucky monkey number 1. Unlucky monkey number 1 immediately lunged, clearly seeking revenge against Lin Xiao, the evil human. Then, it discovered the remarkable power of its new arm. It had a sense of touch, but no pain, and it was incredibly strong. It would occasionally pound on the cage, almost as if it were grabbing Lin Xiao's hand. Of course, Lin Xiao's reflexes were now probably faster than a cat's, so he dodged the attack easily. Seeing this, the people around him were once again filled with astonishment. With that movement, who could doubt the monkey was fake? Someone immediately pulled out their phone, wanting to take photos. Of course, they tactfully asked Lin Xiao if they could, considering it might be some secret discovery. Lin Xiao waved it off, saying there was nothing to be ashamed of. He was planning to release it for the benefit of humanity anyway, so he announced it now. Who knows, somewhere out there, a disabled person, desperate and on the verge of suicide, might suddenly see this news and find hope again. So, Lin Xiao didn't mind them spreading the news, that was his intention. Accepting his approval, the people around him naturally pulled out their phones and began filming and posting it to their WhatsApp moments or sharing it in their group chats. Holy crap, look what this is, click here to load video, wow, look what our director has come up with again. Big news, click here to view image, Lin Xiao is truly invincible. He's even created a mechanical prosthetic limb. And it actually moves. There are quite a few researchers here. After they posted this news online, many other netizens naturally saw it, and after causing a stir, the news spread even further. Within just half an hour, many netizens still browsing the internet had seen the news, and naturally, this matter became a trending topic. Flesh and blood are weak, but machines ascend. Oh my god, this monkey is going to kill someone in one round. Is this the beginning of Rise of the Planet of the Apes? Is there anything Lin Xiao can't do? Can't have children? God can't have children? Maybe after seeing this, Lin Xiao will develop a complete sex change technology. That's too perverted, right? Then, let a brother try it, and then let the brothers try it when he comes back. Aren't the two tryings you referring to something a little different? I'm getting off topic. Aren't we supposed to be astonished by the technology behind this robotic arm? Now that it's here, doesn't that mean we humans can use this technology too? If disabled people use this kind of mobile prosthetic limb, wouldn't it be like regaining a limb? Yes. This technology can definitely be used by people with disabilities. Academician Lin previously solved paralysis with artificial nerves, and now he's solving limb disability. It's a godsend for humanity, isn't it? Why not say thank you, God Lin, thank you, God Lin, thank you, Academician Lin. The heated online discussion has also garnered widespread attention from those involved, especially those with disabilities. For people with disabilities, physical disabilities can even make them afraid to go out. This is a psychological issue, and resolving it is extremely difficult. The best solution, naturally, is to restore normal mobility. And these nerve-operated prosthetic limbs are undoubtedly the best option. Many people flooded Lin Xiao's social media accounts with questions about the prosthetic limb. They wanted to know if it was only for monkeys or could also be used on humans. Most of these people were physically disabled or their families, and upon hearing the news, they were undoubtedly the most excited. While most people with physical disabilities still have some mobility compared to paralyzed individuals, at least to a certain extent, and can care for themselves without family supervision, it's still a significant financial burden on their families. If they regain mobility and gain full labor power, they could fully support themselves, much like those with paralysis. Of course, beyond these financial considerations, there's also the simplest emotional factor: who would want to remain disabled themselves, or see their loved one become disabled? Lin Xiao didn't ignore the inquiries of these individuals and their families, but instead responded, "Regarding the robotic prosthesis, we're ready to test it on disabled individuals. If all goes well, it will be commercially available. Furthermore, according to my insider information, if successful, it will also be covered by medical insurance. Also, there's good news. We're not just addressing the physically disabled, we're also working on addressing the blind, and we expect to be able to do so in the future." Lin Xiao's response immediately reignited the buzz surrounding the issue, which had been declining. Solving the blind's problem. What a tremendous undertaking that would be. Everyone understood. Everyone yearns for light, and restoring sight is a truly wonderful thing. Therefore, everyone understood the shocking nature of Lin Xiao's announcement. As for why the deaf and mute weren't being addressed, it was because current cochlear implant technology can essentially treat severe and profound hearing loss. Muteness isn't directly related to nerves. Speech production is primarily the vibration of the vocal cords, ultimately relying on the central nervous system's ability to control these vibrations. Of course, most muteness stems from hearing problems, which is why deafness and muteness are often linked. In short, Lin Xiao's announcement rekindled the concerns of the families of the blind. The technology Lin Xiao mentioned would also be covered by medical insurance in the future, which excited people even more. Just like cochlear implants, it would be reimbursed, potentially up to 60,000 or 70,000 yuan, significantly reducing the burden on ordinary families. As a result, millions of families, combined, were now obsessed with this technology. Ting ting, we're home. Come slowly, there's a threshold. Yes, just step over it. In a third-tier city, a man in his 40s walked into their home, holding his daughter's hand. The daughter, carrying a small backpack, had obviously returned from school. She was adorable, but her eyes were closed. Or rather, they had been, ever since she was born. The daughter, who had been silent all the way home, said, "Dad, I don't want to go to school anymore." Hearing his daughter speak, the man was delighted, because for someone born blind like his daughter, learning to speak is extremely difficult. However, his daughter's words startled him. "What's wrong, Ting Ting? Why don't you want to go?" Ting Ting shook her head and simply said, "I just don't want to go." Seeing his daughter wouldn't explain, the man had no choice but to say softly, "Okay, then Daddy'll give you a few days off, and we'll talk later, okay?" Ting Ting lowered her head and said nothing. The man sighed silently, and just then, the door to the inner room opened, and his wife came out. But what puzzled him was her wife's face, filled with surprise. "Hong Wei, Ting Ting has a chance to open her eyes." The man was stunned and said in disbelief, "What did you say?" Ting Ting also heard the voice and looked to the left of her mother, who was approaching. The woman came up to the man with her phone and showed him the content. Her face was filled with surprise. "It's that Lin Xiao. He said he's researching technology to cure blindness." The man's face grew increasingly excited as he read the content on his phone. Ting Ting, who was standing next to him, whispered again, Can I see now?" The man and his wife exchanged a glance, then said with certainty, "Yes, Ting Ting, you will be able to see in the future. It's that brother named Lin Xiao I told you about. Do you remember him?" "Yes, I do. Dad said he's amazing and knows everything." "Yeah, so he's trying to find a way to get you back to seeing. Maybe it won't be long," the man said. Then, he saw his daughter's face, which had never smiled, break into a brilliant smile. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365, Preparing for Mechanical Prosthetic Surgery. Professor Lin Xiao heard someone calling out to him as he walked into a military hospital. He turned and saw a familiar figure, Shi Hao. Lin Xiao's eyes lit up. Shi Hao. You're here too? Shi Hao trotted over to Lin Xiao, a broad smile on his face. Yes, I brought those people here this time, and I'll be downstairs to pick you up now. Lin Xiao nodded and asked, what are you doing now? Shi Hao said, I've been assigned to work as a civilian in the National Security Bureau, responsible for some simple tasks. That's good. Lin Xiao smiled, watching Shi Hao regain his former upright figure. The posture that once belonged to a soldier, although it had been depressed for a while, finally returned to him. Looks like you're recovering well. Shi Hao nodded and said, yeah, it's not bad. After all, it's been so long. I just can't do any strenuous exercise yet. Lin Xiao smiled. Looking at your figure, you don't look like you need to exercise right now. Shi Hao scratched his head and said, but life lies in exercise. Speaking of which, I haven't seen you, Professor Lin, exercise much, but you look healthy and not in any sub-healthy state. Lin Xiao smiled and said, scientific research contributes to physical and mental health. Of course, he said that, but he also knew that his health was due to the effects of the health capsule he had taken. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao felt even more at a loss. If he was given another pill, he would definitely study its contents. Finally, shaking his head, he said, okay, let's put this aside for now. Take me there, okay? Shi Hao nodded, then led Lin Xiao into the hospital and to the inpatient department. This time, Lin Xiao came specifically to discuss the prosthetic limb. Under Ma Gaolian's direction, 5 soldiers with disabilities were selected, and Lin Xiao was asked to design mechanical prosthetic limbs for them. The goal was to see how they fared and whether they could function normally. Soon, Lin Xiao and Shi Hao arrived at a ward. Academician Lin, Ma Gaolian was inside, and upon seeing Lin Xiao enter, he immediately stood up and addressed him. In addition, 5 other people were sitting or lying on chairs and beds in the room. Upon seeing Lin Xiao enter, these 5 people turned their gazes and shouted, Academician Lin. Lin Xiao looked at the 5 men. They all had buzz cuts, exuding a sharp aura. It was easy to guess the profession, soldiers, veterans of the battlefield. However, despite this, the physical challenges of these 5 soldiers ultimately dampened their sharpness and edge. This was because all 5 soldiers were, surprisingly, disabled. One of them had only lost one hand, which was considered the best, but the others had at least 2 limbs broken. The worst-case scenario was that only his left hand remained, with both legs and right hand gone. Lin Xiao was horrified by what he saw. He could see in the eyes of these 5 people their earnest hope for him. No one wants to accept their disability, and these 5 people clearly felt the same way. So in their eyes, Lin Xiao was the one who could save them. Hello. Lin Xiao nodded slightly. Meanwhile, another man in a military uniform appeared in the room, his shoulder epaulets emblazoned with the golden stars and wheat ears. He was a general. He walked up to Lin Xiao, extended his hand, and said, hello, Academician Lin. I am Jiang Zuping, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Peacekeeping Force. Hello, General Jiang. Lin Xiao extended his hand and shook his. Jiang Zuping then turned to look at the 5 disabled soldiers in the ward, his face heavy. These 5 were all my soldiers. But back in the Middle East, we were carrying out a plan to rescue civilians when we were unexpectedly attacked. These 5 were part of a squad, and in the end, a bomb from the enemy destroyed them. Their captain died heroically protecting them. Jiang Zuping sighed. It was my command error back then, Captain. Please don't be like this. We were a bit reckless back then. It has nothing to do with you. Don't blame yourself, the soldier with only one hand broken off said quickly. Several others chided him. Yes. It has nothing to do with you, Captain. This is all our fault. Jiang Zuping glared and roared, what are you talking about? I said this was my fault. Why are you fighting over it? The general's wrath silenced the 5 soldiers. Seeing this, Lin Xiao couldn't help but shake his head in amusement. So this is how a general scolds his soldiers? After Jiang Zuping gave a lecture, he probably felt soft-hearted when he saw his 5 soldiers. Finally, he restrained his voice, sighed, and said, okay, don't say anything. We invited academician Lin here today, and I won't say much." Then he looked at Lin Xiao and said very solemnly, "In short, academician Lin, these soldiers of mine are relying on you. I hope you can help them stand up again." The 5 soldiers also said to Lin Xiao, "Academician Lin, thank you for your trouble." Lin Xiao nodded seriously and said, "Don't worry, I will do my best." Ma Gaolian next to him also smiled and said to Zhang Zuiping, "General Zhang, don't worry." "Who is academician Lin?" As he said that, he patted Shi Hao next to him and said with a smile, "It's this kid." He was responsible for protecting academician Lin at the time. As a result, he encountered an accident. You should know that academician Lin invented the artificial nerve in order to help him stand up. Is that so? Zhang Zuiping's expression was immediately astonished. So there was a reason behind Lin Xiao's development of the artificial nerve. Shi Hao, being able to protect someone like him, was truly fortunate. And at the same time, it benefited humanity as a whole. For example, several of his soldiers had suffered paralysis in peacekeeping missions, and now, thanks to artificial nerve replacements, they've reportedly recovered. Zhang Zuiping immediately laughed. "Well, it seems like we need to assign academician Lin a few more people to protect him. If anything goes wrong, academician Lin can develop new technologies that benefit society." Hearing this, Ma Gaolian couldn't help but chuckle. "That makes sense." Lin Xiao, standing next to him, shook his head helplessly and said, "So you're hoping for more accidents?" Zhang Zuiping and Ma Gaolian both waved their hands and smiled. "No, no, absolutely not." Lin Xiao didn't bother to argue with him. He turned and approached the 5 peacekeepers, visually assessing the best size of prosthetic limb for them. He quickly memorized all the data: 5 legs, 5 arms, and even a left-right difference, but overall, it wasn't a big deal. He then said to Zhang Zuiping, "All right, General Zhang, I've memorized the relevant data. Please send it to me as soon as possible, and I'll begin crafting the necessary mechanical prostheses. It'll take about a month, so you can prepare for the surgery." Upon hearing that the surgery could begin in a month, Zhang Zuiping and the 5 soldiers' faces lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, academician Lin. Thank you, academician Lin." Ma Gaolian, standing beside him, also smiled and said, "Academician Lin, thank you for your help." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "No problem." Ma Gaolian nodded, feeling as if everything was settled after hearing Lin Xiao's words. But after a moment's thought, he asked, "By the way, Professor Lin, what about that electronic prosthetic eye you mentioned recently to help the blind? How is it going?" "It shouldn't be long. It's mainly a chip design issue right now, but it should be ready soon," Lin Xiao said. He handed the chip design question directly to Kong Huan. Kong Huan was still on the new supercomputer's chip design team. It was said that he had demonstrated remarkable talent there. Wang Wenguang, the director of the Xi City Supercomputing Center, sometimes expressed his admiration for Kong Huan when he called him. Therefore, his question wouldn't be too much of a hassle for Kong Huan. That's good, Ma Gaolian said with a hint of excitement. Lin Xiao had a feeling that Ma Gaolian seemed to be keeping something to himself, so he couldn't help but ask, "Are you very eager to see the advent of electronic prosthetic eyes?" Ma Gaolian was stunned for a moment, then sighed and said, "I have a close friend who lost his sight due to glaucoma. I really hope he can recover." Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I understand. Well, thank you for your help. It's not a big deal. It's just technical stuff." Lin Xiao smiled and waved his hand, then left without further ado. Time passed quickly. While the outside world was still discussing the news revealed in Lin Xiao's Weibo post, Lin Xiao began to build mechanical prosthetic limbs for the 5 peacekeepers. Of course, these prosthetic limbs were more than just prosthetic limbs. This time, he was testing not only whether Lin Xiao's technology could restore full mobility to these soldiers, but also whether they could achieve mobility beyond basic human capabilities. Therefore, Lin Xiao had sufficient funds this time, allowing him to purchase extremely strong materials and build a sufficiently powerful prosthetic limb. And so, time passed a month later. Chapter 366. Is this really going to be mechanical ascension? Professor Lin, you're here? Yes, still at the same hospital. Lin Xiao and 5 others approached Shi Hao, who stood at the hospital entrance. Each of them carried 2 boxes. Inside were the 10 prosthetic limbs, 5 legs and 5 arms. Lin Xiao couldn't possibly create them all by himself in a month, so he enlisted the help of several others, including the 5 behind him. Xiao stepped forward, helped Lin Xiao carry the boxes, and said, "Let's go upstairs." "Yes," Lin Xiao nodded, and they followed Xiao into the hospital. They soon arrived at a room. Ma Gaolian was there, as was General Jiang Zuiping from last time, and of course, the 5 peacekeepers. The 5 soldiers looked at Lin Xiao expectantly, clearly knowing he had good news. "Academician Lin, how is it?" Jiang Zuiping approached quickly, his face etched with impatience. He knew the effects of this batch of equipment best. Frankly speaking, if it worked, it would be like building a team of Iron Man for him. Of course, the most crucial thing was that it could help his 5 soldiers stand up again, alleviating the guilt he felt for his initial misstep. While it's said that kindness is a trait in the military, the soldiers in his peacekeeping force were already incredibly valuable. Even the thought of one being injured, let alone sacrificed, was heartbreaking, let alone the fact that all 5 were now disabled. How could he possibly accept that? So, he now wanted them to stand up even more than the 5 soldiers themselves. Lin Xiao smiled, grabbed a nearby box, opened it, and showed them to them. Seeing a robotic arm inside, everyone present gulped. Isn't that a bit too cool? The metallic surface, the screws, and especially the structure of each joint evoked a mechanical feel. Lin Xiao said, "This is for Wang Hao." He looked at a peacekeeper named Wang Hao. Wang Hao had lost an arm and a leg in the accident, and this robotic arm fit his body perfectly. Wang Hao's face was filled with delight. After all, if this thing were attached to his body, he'd even dare to show it off in the streets, showing everyone what a robotic warrior was. Meanwhile, the other 4 people also showed anticipation, eager to see what their prosthetic limbs would look like. However, Jiang Zuiping didn't bother to look at them one by one. He simply said, "What are we waiting for? Let's begin the operation now." With the general's order, the others quickly summoned doctors and began the operation. The doctors, of course, already knew what they were going to perform, but the first glance at the mechanical prostheses surprised them. These weren't the usual prosthetic legs, which were generally slender. These were a bit sturdier. After all, prosthetic legs didn't require batteries, while these did. Naturally, the doctors became intrigued. When had they ever performed this kind of surgery before? At this moment, they couldn't help but anticipate the moment when the surgery was complete and the mechanical prostheses, driven by the human nerve currents, would begin to move. The surgery went quickly, except for the peacekeeper with only one arm, which took a little longer. However, the other 4 people still emerged. In the ward, everyone present, except Lin Xiao, looked at the 4 people lying on the beds with their limbs restored to health, with expressions of immense amazement. They had all witnessed the 4 people's metal limbs flexing flexibly. Wang Hao, meanwhile, extended his mechanical hand, his 5 fingers occasionally clenching and unclenching. Watching this scene, his face was filled with surprise and delight. He was amazed that he could control the metal prosthesis and even felt a sense of touch coming from it, as if it were his own hand. Incredible. And the real surprise was that he had regained his hand. And of course, a leg. He lowered his head and looked at his metal leg again. He moved his knees and ankles, finding them perfectly flexible. The only problem was his toes. Of course, that wasn't a big deal. Human toes are vestigial organs, serving only limited functions, serving only as support when standing on tiptoe. Looking at his perfect body, he had only one thought: "Captain, if you're still alive, I'll avenge you if I get a chance." Meanwhile, 3 other people shared his thoughts. They too surveyed their new limbs, occasionally shifting them, their faces revealing their excitement. Meanwhile, a 5th person was wheeled back onto the bed. He had lost an entire arm and both hands. Arguably, his limbs had undergone the most modifications. Everyone stared at him in amazement. "Deputy Captain, how are you feeling?" Wang Hao asked. This person was their team's deputy captain, Zhang Li. Zhang Li was a quiet person, perhaps because he only had one hand or simply because it was his nature. However, the excitement on his face was palpable. Hearing Wang Hao's question, he extended his hand, glanced at it, and said, "I feel pretty good." Wang Hao laughed. "Haha, brothers, we can all stand up again now." The others also laughed happily. Zhang Li looked at his hands, then turned to look at Lin Xiao beside him, and said seriously, "Academician Lin, thank you for your technology." "We brothers all thank you." Wang Hao and the others also reacted. They were so busy with their own happiness that they forgot to express their gratitude to Lin Xiao, so they all said to Lin Xiao, "Academician Lin, thank you very much." Lin Xiao smiled and said, "You sacrificed for peace. I helped you to help peace. You don't need to thank me." Zhang Zuiping next to him smiled and said, "No matter what, academician Lin, you have made another contribution to the benefit of mankind. If you were a member of our army, you would at least be awarded a first-class individual merit." "Hey, at least there is an exception." Ma Gaolian smiled at this time. "Making an exception? Well, it's not impossible. After all, if a war breaks out, who knows how much use academician Lin's technology would bring us. Hey, I'll talk to the military commission later and award academician Lin a first-class merit." "It shouldn't be a problem," Zhang Zuiping said, patting his chest. Lin Xiao was at a loss for words. Not really, very much," Ma Gaolian said. "For example, the magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion technology for nuclear submarines that Lin Xiao had developed was definitely a first-class merit. Not to mention the previous superconductor technology. The first-class merit award criteria also include major scientific and technological breakthroughs. Academician Ma Weimin, for example, had also been awarded a first-class merit." Zhang Zuiping, who was standing by, immediately pulled out his phone and said, "I'll stop talking. I'll make a call right now." He then left. Seeing this, Lin Xiao shook his head helplessly. If that happened, he'd probably have another medal in his medal cabinet. However, while Zhang Zuiping was out making his call, his phone rang. He glanced and saw it was Kong Huan. With a guess in mind, he left the ward and answered the phone. "Old Kong, what's wrong? I've designed the chip you asked for, so quickly. I looked at the information you provided. To implement this thing, we don't need a 90 nm process, a 157 nm process will do, which is also more cost-effective." "Well, thank you for your help," Lin Xiao said. "Haha, it's no big deal," Kong Huan said. "But, can this thing really translate optical information? And then make it understandable to the brain?" Lin Xiao smiled. "I don't know, but I think it's probably possible. It's like a monitor and a computer. The monitor and the computer are connected by wires, and the wires only serve to transmit current. But how does this current transmit different images? It uses different electrical potentials to output 1S and 0S. The optic nerve is just like this wire, except that its output is not binary," Kong Huan said. "Okay, I understand. Do I need to contact the manufacturer now to start tape out?" "Okay," Lin Xiao said. "Okay," Kong Huan replied, then hung up. 157 nm is a 20-year-old process technology, the predecessor of 90 nm. While considered outdated, some manufacturers are still capable of producing it. Furthermore, because the technology is so mature, there's little concern about production issues. Once the tape-out is successful, mass production can begin. This means it won't be long before the blind regain their sight. Lin Xiao smiled faintly, put his phone away, and returned to the ward. But now he looked inside in surprise. They'd found a steel pipe, which was now being held by Deputy Captain Zhongli. Technically, it was being gripped by a mechanical grip. Suddenly, Zhongli exerted force, and the hollow steel pipe was flattened. Everyone present gasped in amazement at this sight. Even though a steel pipe was hollow, it was still incredibly horrifying to see it flattened. They all couldn't help but look at the robotic arm. This was truly beyond human capabilities. Previously, they'd only talked about topics like mechanical ascension for fun, but now seeing this scene, they couldn't help but wonder, is this really possible? Chapter 367 Electronic Prosthetic Eye. Looking at the flattened steel pipe, Zhongli's face was filled with astonishment. He hadn't expected such a piece of steel to be so easily crushed. Although they had anticipated this, after all, before designing this thing, they had already made relevant plans, such as the grip strength and other strength requirements of these mechanical prostheses. This was why they provided Lin Xiao with so much funding, in addition to various confidential materials. Just one of these mechanical prostheses would cost millions. And now it seemed that the actual effect had indeed met their expectations. At this time, they all saw Lin Xiao enter. Ma Gaolian said immediately, "Professor Lin, this mechanical prosthesis is really amazing." Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, "Actually, it's just like this. After all, the materials used are relatively good. If we can replace it with some more powerful materials, the effect should be even greater. In addition, it's the same problem, that is the connection," Lin Xiao said. "Now we still use bone screws for connection, and the connection method between the bone screws themselves and the bone still determines that it cannot bear too much force. After all, the overall structural strength of a whole body is always higher than that of the parts, so I think the most perfect way is to change the overall structure directly from the joints. We need to try our best to develop a material that can form a ligament between metal and human bones. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, everyone present showed a thoughtful expression. Of course, they were not thinking about how to develop this material, but how long it would take for scientists to develop this thing. At this moment, Zhang Zuiping smiled brightly and said, "Hey, why are you saying so much? At least the current performance has met expectations. As for future technological breakthroughs, we'll take it one step at a time. By the way, academician Lin, I just called. I'll arrange for you to receive a first-class merit award this year. Then you'll be a first-class meritorious contributor." Ma Gaolian also smiled and said, "Yes, I'll send your family a plaque proclaiming the first-class meritorious contributors family." Academician Lin, what do you think? Everyone around looked at Lin Xiao with envy. After all, only Shi Hao and Zhuang Li, the former military men in the room, were present. They naturally understood the value of a first-class merit award. Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, "Since you all said so, of course I won't refuse it." How everyone present laughed. They chatted for a while longer, and Lin Xiao didn't stay any longer. Of course, the news of the successful clinical trial of the mechanical prosthesis quickly spread. After all, they were in the hospital, so the news couldn't be hidden for long. Besides, they hadn't intended to hide it. Thus, the video of the 5 cyborgs was released to the public. Suddenly, nationwide, oh no, even worldwide, this incident sparked a heated discussion. The mechanical monkeys were already shocking, let alone a human. Seeing a human with mechanical limbs was even more visually striking than a monkey. The domestic comments section exploded with comments. Our China. I never dreamed I'd see something like this. Our China. Minamoto. Genji is Genji, not Minamoto. So cool. Oh, I want one for myself, too, but I have to be disabled. Can't I just attach a full micha? Would you like an external spirit bone? I'm disabled. I just want to know when this thing will be available. I can't wait to get it installed. At this moment, I'm actually a little envious of you. Damn, I'm a little envious too. Domestically, this matter was being discussed avidly. While comments were also being made abroad, the discussion differed somewhat. For example, America. Why was this technology developed in China? Where are our scientists? What are our scientists doing? Before it was artificial nerves, and now this kind of robotic prosthetics. Hey, don't we always say our country is the most technologically advanced in the world? Why are we always lagging behind? Is this still how our president describes our country? Perhaps our scientists aren't as good as that Chinese scientist named Lin Xiao. Is this the poor and backward place our media portrays us as? But they've even solved the problem of curing paralysis and restoring disabilities. Are you telling me they did it through some mysterious Eastern power? Well, it seems our disabled people, like those paralyzed patients, need to prepare to go abroad. A robotic arm like this is just too cool. I want one too. What? This wasn't developed in our country? What a joke. We've produced so many science fiction films, and this technology didn't even appear here first. American netizens were filled with disappointment, and at this moment, they erupted in outrage. Previous artificial nerves hadn't caused them such outbursts. After all, while they sounded impressive, they were used inside the body, so nothing could be seen. But now, with robotic arms, you can actually see things, and they even have a sci-fi feel. Chinese people have their share of sci-fi and their share of traditional Chinese culture. However, Americans can't grasp traditional Chinese culture, so sci-fi becomes their primary pursuit. Clearly, the current robotic prostheses hide a sore spot. This sense of disparity has led to dissatisfaction. These voices have also gained considerable influence on international forums, with many urging their medical institutions to quickly develop this technology. Furthermore, many who need this medical technology are reluctant to travel abroad for treatment, so their voices are quite powerful in this context. As time went on, the pace intensified. Nearly a month later, the situation finally began to show in the approval ratings, and the American government began to fret. What a joke. Is this kind of technology just something you can just dream up? The president exclaimed in frustration in the White House. These idiots are like uneducated Indians. Everyone in the room looked at each other in bewilderment. It was a good thing there weren't any microphones recording his words, otherwise, their president would have committed political suicide. However, the president was well aware that his words would not be heard by the outside world. After a few words of complaint, he looked at the Secretary of State beside him and asked in a cold voice, "How is your investigation going?" The Secretary of State immediately said, "Regarding this mechanical prosthesis, artificial nerves are definitely a key technology. However, there is another crucial issue, and that is their translation of neural currents. This is the most critical aspect of their technology. Without perfect translation of neural currents, the mechanical prosthesis cannot achieve such stable control. But we haven't been able to crack these technologies yet. After all, we haven't even obtained a sample, still haven't got a sample? It's been so long," the Secretary of State quickly explained. "Mr. President, we still need to wait for the right time. Their artificial nerves have only been on the market for a short time. Since they prioritize military and police personnel, those imported from foreign countries generally have to wait a long time. Therefore, as of now, there are no artificial nerves on our land, and even if we wanted to obtain a sample, if we wanted to take action, we would need to plan ahead and fake the problem with their artificial nerves, so it would take a lot of time." The president snorted coldly and said, "I'll trust you this time." The Secretary of State breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the president hadn't pushed for such a thing. Otherwise, if his hasty preparations led to failure, he would probably be ready to step down. However, at this moment, the presidential secretary next to him suddenly said, "Oh my God." His voice immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the office. "What's wrong, Fields?" the president asked with a frown. The secretary said, "Mr. President, Lin Xiao announced on his social media that their electronic prosthetic eye is about to be released." "What? Electronic prosthetic eye?" The president and the Secretary of State were immediately incredulous. "Electronic prosthetic eye? Is Lin Xiao really going to solve even blindness now?" In China, at the Dingguang Research Institute, Lin Xiao picked up a pair of glasses-like objects in his hand and smiled. In just a month, the tape-out was successful, and over 100 chips had been trial-produced, with the results generally meeting expectations. With a chip in hand, the electronic prosthetic eye would naturally be easy to build. It only required simple assembly. As for why he's holding a pair of glasses instead of his eyes, it is actually for charging. The electronic prosthetic eye requires a camera. Although the clarity does not need to be very high, 720p is enough, the camera consumes a lot of power. Now the battery can be transferred to the frame. In addition, the chip of the camera generally generates a lot of heat, such as the CMOS chip. Now transferring this chip to the frame can also prevent the prosthetic eye from heating up and causing intolerance to the human body. In this way, plus the prosthetic eye itself, this is what he designed, the electronic prosthetic eye. Chapter 368. You will be able to see the world. We can start preparing for clinical trials again, Lin Xiao thought to himself, putting down his glasses. He'd already posted about the electronic prosthetic eye on his Weibo, so the world must be excited by now. However, as is standard practice, it still needed to be tested on animals first. Lin Xiao's mind naturally shifted back to that familiar monkey. Unfortunately, unlucky monkey number 1 had truly become a cyberpunk monkey. Since people were curious about how this monkey, now equipped with a prosthetic limb, was doing, Dingguang Research Institute began promoting it as an internet celebrity, also to better educate the public about the benefits of the prosthetic. As a result, the monkey now had millions of followers online, including on social media platforms like YouTube and TikTok, and even had videos posted online. Therefore, this monkey really couldn't be moved. Lin Xiao shook his head regretfully. It seemed he would have to switch to unlucky monkey number 2. He made another call, and soon, a second experimental monkey was assigned. Then, naturally, Lin Xiao began performing the surgery himself once again. After removing both of its eyeballs, the prosthetic eyes were fitted, followed by the glasses. The surgery was complete, and the next step was to wait for the anesthesia to wear off. Of course, animals often scratch at the wounds after surgery due to itching. To prevent this, the monkey's hands and other parts were tied up, and its head was also slightly secured to prevent it from throwing its glasses off. As time passed, the anesthesia gradually wore off, and the monkey regained consciousness. Of course, Lin Xiao didn't know if the monkey could see with the electronic prosthetic eyes, but testing confirmed it. Since the monkey was restrained and couldn't be released, Lin Xiao simply took a banana he had prepared from nearby, placed it in front of the monkey, and began to shake it. As he shook it, the monkey's head also moved, but the restraint limited the angle of movement. Nevertheless, the monkey's movement in response to the banana proved that the electronic prosthetic eye was a success. Watching this, Lin Xiao smiled. Good. Looks like we can prepare for clinical trials now. Thinking back, he'd spent the past 6 months primarily researching medical fields. While not as busy as the original X-ray project, the results had been quite positive. At least, he'd accidentally solved so many human disabilities. Just then, the system's voice suddenly rang in his ears. The host has temporarily focused his attention on life sciences and is on the verge of solving a problem in this field. Such a great achievement deserves praise. Congratulations to the host for resolving visual impairment, limb disability, and nerve damage. This reward is 1,000 biology experience points and 50 truth points. Congratulations to the host for reaching biology level 3, 702/1000. Hearing these words suddenly, Lin Xiao's face lit up with surprise. While the technologies he had developed were truly remarkable, addressing several challenges facing human disability and neurological impairment, they were all achieved through system rewards, such as the room temperature superconductors used in artificial nerves and the technology for interpreting neural currents. Therefore, he hadn't previously considered receiving system rewards for solving these problems. The sudden award, however, was a pleasant surprise. While the reward itself was rather modest, he hadn't set high expectations, so he was generally satisfied. At least his biology had reached level 3. Then, a familiar sensation came from his brain. From level 1 to level 3, the total increase in brain development was 0.6%. This meant that Lin Xiao's brain development had jumped directly from 10.65% to 11.25%. Feeling the sensation in his brain, a smile spread across Lin Xiao's face. It was unbelievable. It felt like a free ride. He then checked the time. It was time to schedule clinical appointments. Lin Xiao made his decision, and the matter was quickly put on the agenda. Word quickly spread about the need for clinical trials for the electronic prosthetic eye, and immediately, the matter garnered renewed attention. Lin Xiao's Weibo announcement of the successful development of the prosthetic eye had already garnered widespread attention, and the recruitment of volunteers had now sparked even greater excitement. This was especially true for the blind community. The start of the clinical trial meant that once the trial concluded, the technology would soon be available online. This fueled the eagerness of the long-awaited blind community. Of course, some blind individuals were also interested in the clinical recruitment. Clinical volunteers often receive high compensation and receive free treatment. While this was still somewhat uncertain, it's important to remember that even with medical insurance, some extremely poor families couldn't afford even the costs beyond the reimbursement. Therefore, this type of clinical volunteer recruitment became the preferred option. However, beyond these extremely poor families, there were still some individuals who wanted to volunteer. These individuals were those who deeply desired a cure. For the blind, the prospect of restoring their sight is even more alluring than $1 million in cash, so some people eagerly volunteered for the clinical trial. Time passed quickly, and following the success of artificial nerves and mechanical limbs, the first clinical trial of an electronic prosthetic eye arrived. Beijing Union Hospital. As one of the nation's most prestigious hospitals, it boasts many departments qualified to undertake clinical trials. And this time, the responsibility for the electronic prosthetic eye surgery once again fell to Union Hospital. At the door of the clinical trial operating room, 3 people were scheduled to undergo the procedure: a 12-year-old child, a 35-year-old, and a 60-year-old. These 3 age groups were chosen to test the suitability of the electronic prosthetic eye. Most eyes were fixed on the 12-year-old. She was a little girl, known to her parents as Tingting. Her eyes were closed, as if she were asleep, but everyone present knew that this was due to her blindness. However, the very fact that her eyes were closed, without the sight of her blind eyeballs, gave her a more tranquil aura. Everyone present felt a pity for the little girl. They'd heard she was born blind and had been blind since birth. Her parents had originally planned to send their daughter to the hospital for treatment after the clinical trial was successful. How could they bear to see their child as a clinical trial participant? Their daughter insisted on receiving treatment, saying she couldn't stand a world where she couldn't distinguish right from wrong. She begged her parents to apply for the clinical trial. Finally, they applied and were selected. bringing her to this clinic. Of course, the clinic had reassured them that the clinical trial wouldn't harm their daughter or leave any side effects. While they still felt a little uneasy, the sight of so many impressive-sounding doctors persuaded them to believe it. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Academician Lin is here." Everyone looked and saw a young man approaching. Everyone present immediately realized it was Lin Xiao, the developer of the electronic prosthetic eye. Immediately, many people gathered around him, peppering him with questions. "Academician Lin, are you confident about this success rate?" "Academician Lin, you?" Lin Xiao answered their questions, of course, simply to reassure them. Just then, a child's voice rang out, "Dad, is that brother Lin Xiao here?" "Yes, the great scientist Dad told you about." "Oh. Can I talk to him?" "Well." Tingting's father glanced at Lin Xiao, surrounded by so many people, unsure what to say. But just then, Lin Xiao heard Tingting's voice and turned. He then stepped out of the crowd and approached Tingting. He reached out, rubbed Tingting's head, and said with a smile, "Tingting, tell me what you want to say." He knew there was a little girl among the volunteers, so he knew her as Tingting. Tingting was startled by Lin Xiao's voice, then looked up, only to see Lin Xiao's side. "Brother Lin Xiao, will I be able to see what the world looks like later?" Lin Xiao said very confidently. "Of course, Tingting will be able to see it. Thank you, brother Lin Xiao." Tingting's closed eyes curved into crescents. Chapter 369 is lit. Seeing Lin Xiao chatting with the little girl, everyone in the room turned their gazes. The girl's father was also surprised, having never thought Lin Xiao would pay attention to his daughter. In his eyes, Lin Xiao was clearly a prominent figure, distinct from him, a mere office worker living in an obscure city. However, upon hearing Lin Xiao's words, he couldn't help but ask, "Academician Lin, are you telling the truth?" Lin Xiao stood up, looked at the man, and smiled. "Since you've chosen to trust me and the doctors here, there's no need to doubt it. Just know that your daughter will soon be able to see you in person." Lin Xiao's words struck a chord with the man. For him, having his daughter see what her father looked like was a lifelong wish. But before, this long-cherished wish had seemed impossible. Who could have imagined that a technology capable of completely curing blindness would emerge? At this thought, the man's eyes suddenly reddened, and he nodded earnestly, "I understand. Thank you, Academician Lin." His worries faded, replaced by hope that the surgery would go smoothly. Lin Xiao smiled at him, then glanced down at the little girl, reaching out to rub her head again. He checked the time and said to the person next to him, "Can we begin the surgery?" A nearby doctor immediately replied, "It's possible now. The electronic prosthetic eye has been delivered, so we can begin." "Well, let's begin. Don't keep everyone waiting." The clinical trial surgery officially began. The surgical techniques were generally well established. The only significant challenge was locating the optic nerve in the eye socket and then connecting it to the artificial nerve attached to the electronic prosthetic eye. This was the most daunting step for the surgeon. Of course, since they had chosen Union Hospital, this step wasn't a major concern. Standing in front of the 3 operating room doors, Lin Xiao looked down at his hands. He was suddenly feeling itchy. He'd always performed surgery on monkeys, and now he had the confidence to operate on humans. Unfortunately, no patient would likely let him operate on them. He shook his head slightly, and at that moment, a voice rang out from the side. "What are you thinking about, Academician Lin?" Lin Xiao turned and saw Chen Zhuan. Chen Zhuan was a researcher in the Central Neurological Laboratory at Dingguang Research Institute and the same imperial neurosurgeon at Union Hospital who had performed the artificial nerve surgery. "Professor Chen," Lin Xiao said with a smile. "I was wondering how much of a shock it would be for a blind person to recover their sight after being born blind. He certainly wouldn't say he wanted to perform surgery on a human. That would still sound a bit shocking." After hearing his answer, Chen Zhuan began to think. That's a good question." After a moment, he replied with a smile. "From a practical perspective, it's like seeing only darkness all the time. Oh, for the person himself, he doesn't even know what darkness is. In short, it's like a world that was once empty is suddenly filled with light. If you put it from a philosophical perspective, it's like escaping darkness and entering light." Never mind, let's not speculate. I think if we could ask a few patients who've regained their sight later, it would be more accurate than our random guesses." "That's true," Lin Xiao nodded with a smile. "If they were guessing, it would be like doing a reading comprehension test, but those patients were actually the authors of this reading comprehension test. Their own feelings would obviously be more accurate than the standard answer. But having said that, academician Lin always achieves such amazing results. It's truly incredible. I wonder if I could tell you how you interpret neural currents. At this point, Chen Zhuan couldn't help but look at Lin Xiao. Not only him, but everyone involved in the world was eager to learn from Lin Xiao about this question. How did he achieve such stable neural current interpretation? Lin Xiao smiled and said, "That's a question." Seeing Lin Xiao open his mouth, Chen Zhuan immediately stared at him, anticipating his answer. But the next moment, Lin Xiao said, "It's confidential for now." Chen Zhuan glared, then shook his head helplessly. "All right, I'm being presumptuous. This technology was invaluable. Of course Lin Xiao had to keep it secret, and Chen Zhuan knew it." Lin Xiao smiled and nodded. In fact, if room temperature superconductors hadn't been classified, he would have applied for a patent long ago. Of course, he also had related benefits. For example, although he couldn't apply for a patent for his artificial nerve, he still signed a secret agreement with the government. Before the room temperature superconductor was made public, the government recognized his patent for the artificial nerve. He then licensed the patent to other state-owned institutions for production, allowing him to earn royalties. Of course, since his main source of income was patents, these issues weren't a big deal. Besides artificial nerves, current mechanical prosthetics and electronic eyes operate in a similar manner. Of course, he still held a method for interpreting neural currents, keeping it secret. Naturally, he reaps the lion's share of the profits from this technology. Therefore, he doesn't have to worry about others taking advantage of his own technology. While money is tempting, it doesn't seduce him. He has everything he needs for food, clothing, housing, and transportation without spending his own money. He easily spends hundreds of millions of dollars in government research funding. Therefore, he's never been particularly concerned with the money he earns, simply wanting to reap the benefits that are his. He's given most of it to his mother for safekeeping. As for his father, he'll have to ask his mother for the money himself. I wonder how much I'll get after this successful electronic eye. Lin Xiao pondered this, then shook his head, deciding not to think about it. After all, no matter how much money he gets, it's probably not as much as his 100 truth points. The two continued chatting. Chen Zhuan seemed unbusy today, seemingly relaxed. Time passed quickly. A few hours later, the red light at the door to the operating room where the little girl, Ting, was operating, went out. This signaled the end of the surgery. Many of the waiting people stood up and looked toward the door. It opened, and the doctor emerged. Ting's father was the first to rush forward, excitedly and eagerly asking, "Doctor, how is my daughter? Can she see?" For several hours, he had been consumed by the most agonizing thought. Of course, he couldn't help but imagine the moment when Ting emerged, her eyes fixed on him, and she'd call him Dad. He had been anticipating that moment for 12 years. And it was this anticipation that had kept him waiting until now. The doctor reassured the father, saying, "Sir, please don't worry. This is eye surgery, so it will take some time to recover, so please don't worry." Of course, I can also tell you that the operation went smoothly. We did everything we needed to do. Now, you just have to wait and see if the electronic eye works. Hearing the doctor's words, the father nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you, doctor. Anyway, there's nothing to thank me for. To us doctors, it's just an operation. But if it's successful, you should thank academician Lin for saving your daughter." "Yes, I understand," the man nodded solemnly. At that moment, a bed was wheeled out of the operating room. Lying on it was Ting, her eyes bandaged and asleep from the anesthesia. The bed was wheeled into the ward, and many people followed, each of them concerned. The other two people were quickly wheeled out and into the same ward. A crowd gathered around, while 3 people lay in hospital beds, awaiting the final answer. What is this? Why is it like this? There seem to be a lot of people around, and a lot of noise, but why do I feel something more in my mind? It's different from before." The anesthesia gradually wore off, and Ting awoke from her deep sleep. But at this moment, she discovered that the world she perceived seemed different. But in reality, it was brighter, like closing your eyes, but light still penetrates the thin layer of eyelids, and your eyes can still see a hazy glow. However, Ting, who had never seen the world bright before, didn't realize it was brighter. She stirred, trying to sit up, but her father's familiar voice quickly came from beside her. "Ting, are you awake? Don't move yet. The doctor said you need some time to recover." "Oh," hearing her father's voice, Ting obediently stopped moving. At this time, Dad's voice came to her ears again. So, Ting, how do you feel now? Ting replied, I feel a little strange. The world I felt before, according to Dad, was black, but now it doesn't seem so dark. It should be. There are some other colors, right? It's so strange, I don't know. Hearing Ting's answer, the people around her suddenly opened their eyes wide. It's not black anymore, and there are some other colors? What is this? And at this moment, Lin Xiao's voice came, Ting, what you feel is light, or it should be said that it is bright. Chapter 370 The Significance of Science. Light as paper. Light, scattered everywhere. From a physics perspective, visible light is just one type of electromagnetic wave, or rather, it's just visible electromagnetic waves, and different creatures see different amounts of visible light. The human spectrum covers the range from 312 to 745 nanometers. Snakes, for example, even have infrared vision, meaning wavelengths longer than red. This ability gives them a similar ability to thermal imaging. Therefore, from this perspective, visible light is only special for humans, while for other creatures, it's special in a different way. Of course, from a scientific perspective, this is true. From a theological perspective, however, light is a divine creation, allowing us to walk in the light. Regardless of the explanation, light is clearly essential to human life. However, for the blind, this indispensability becomes a necessity. For those born blind, this is even more despairing, as they don't even know what the world looks like, light, darkness, azure, or navy. After all, when explaining things to them, it's impossible to just say, RGB values of 0, 235, 192 are aquamarine, and RGB values of 0, 0, 128 are navy blue. So, for Ting, she had never understood what bright meant. But now, after Lin Xiao's explanation, she finally understood what bright meant. This is light, this is bright. Ting was filled with astonishment. Could she really see light? Or, in other words, could she really see the world? But then she asked again, but why can I only see light now? I still can't see my dad. Lin Xiao smiled faintly. Don't worry. We've applied some medicine to your eyes, so they're bandaged. We need to wait for the medicine to absorb before we can remove it, so wait a little longer, okay? Ting happily agreed. Then, she calmly waited again. After all, she had already waited so long, and a few more hours wouldn't be a problem. Time passed quickly, and hours passed. Darkness had already fallen. Of course, despite the darkness, the lights of the bustling city still shone brightly. The myriad lights outside contrasted beautifully with a single, bright light within. The nurses began to remove the gauze from the faces of the three blind people. By this point, judging by their reactions, it was almost certain that their vision had returned. So, they could now be called formally blind. In the past, these two terms couldn't be combined in this way, because once blind, they were irreversibly lost. Come, Ting, sit up. I'll show you the outside world now, the nurse said gently to the young girl. Ting obediently sat up, waiting for the nurse to remove the last barrier blocking her from the world. Slowly, the gauze was removed. Her fair upper eyelid slowly lifted, revealing a pupil as if she were wearing cosmetic contact lenses. For aesthetic reasons, the pupils were shaped like this, giving them the illusion of giant, two-dimensional eyes. However, everyone around them wasn't concerned with the beauty of the contact lenses, they were instead focused on whether Ting could regain her sight. However, they were puzzled. When Ting opened her eyes, she seemed frozen. She stared blankly ahead. Everyone wondered what had happened to her. In reality, she was simply stunned by what she saw. As the gauze peeled back, she opened her eyes, and a vibrant world suddenly appeared before her eyes. She stared in astonishment, her brain seemingly reeling. She hadn't expected that after over a decade, her optic nerves, which hadn't functioned, would suddenly receive so much information. They activated their nearly rusted optical processing areas, processing the information and allowing their owner to see. Thus, Ting saw the indeterminately colored hospital room, the matching blanket, and the countless people standing around, presumably people. Ting, how are you? A voice called from the side. Ting turned and looked in the direction of the voice. She saw someone, a person she was almost certain was hers. And that voice was one Ting knew all too well. Then, she suddenly rushed forward. Daddy, she cried. Daddy, I can see you. Feeling his daughter's embrace, the man's expression instantly shifted. From excitement to joy, from relief to lament, ultimately transforming into tenderness for his daughter. Daddy knows. Daddy's always watching over you. Watching this scene, everyone around couldn't help but be moved. Even the nurse who had earlier removed the gauze from Tingting's body had tears welling up in her eyes. The scene was like a father and daughter reuniting after 14 years. Meanwhile, from the other side of the ward, another excited voice echoed. I can see again. I can see again. Everyone looked again. The one who shouted these words was none other than the 35-year-old blind man. He had once been sighted, but a severe blow to the eye had gradually deprived him of his vision. If Tingting felt the excitement of regaining sight, he felt the joy of regaining his sight. The former stemmed from the sense of disparity that others possessed, while the latter stemmed from the regret of having once possessed something only to be lost. At this moment, they were all filled with joy at the sight before their eyes. Finally, the 60-year-old man also successfully regained his sight. Having been blind for nearly 30 years, his joy at regaining his sight was undeniable. It meant that in his twilight years, he could once again see the world, perhaps even his children. The old man had already reunited with his child. When he lost his sight, his child was still young, not even 10 years old. Now, with his sight restored, he looked at the child, who bore a striking resemblance to himself, just as he did when he first lost his sight. The old man smiled, gently caressing the child's face. He said, "You've grown up. I've finally seen you grow up." Upon hearing his father's words, his son, now in his 30s, burst into tears and hugged his father. Dad. These touching scenes moved everyone present. Seeing the world is such a normal thing, but for the blind, it becomes abnormal. But at this moment, they can see, or see again, the world and their loved ones. Everyone was filled with emotion. And amidst this emotion, no one forgot what had made this scene possible. An electronic prosthetic eye. Everyone's gaze turned to the genius scientist. Lin Xiao, too, was beaming as he watched the scene unfold before him. He was clearly overjoyed to see the technology he had created make this possible. This was exactly what he had worked for, what he had ultimately hoped to receive. Of course, this also gave him a taste of the power of technology. Technology is constantly advancing, and scenarios like this are bound to appear more frequently in the future. Just like when video chat technology via webcam first emerged, countless people thousands of miles away, who normally could only miss their loved ones through photos, now have the ability to chat face-to-face with them from the comfort of their own homes. Lin Xiao couldn't help but feel nostalgic. This is where technology should truly shine, where its power shines, not in some murderous technology designed for war and slaughter. But helplessly, these weapons have to be developed. Thinking of this, he sighed softly. Chen Zhuan, who hadn't left his side, couldn't help but ask, "Academician Lin, why are you sighing? What a beautiful scene." Sighing wouldn't be nice. Lin Xiao smiled and waved his hand. "I know, I'm just feeling a little sentimental." Chen Zhuan nodded, not asking what Lin Xiao was feeling. Everyone has their moments of melancholy, of lamenting the passing of time. He, too, had his share of such sentimentality. Of course, watching all this unfold, he felt nothing but joy. Great. Now I might know the answer to that question. Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment, then remembered the question. He smiled and asked, "What do you think the answer is?" Chen Zhuan smiled and said, "The answer is, why should I think so much? I can see what the world looks like, but I'm getting old, so I'd rather spend more time with my family. Alice, so I'm leaving now." He then waved his hand and turned towards the door, shaking his head as he said, "It's rare that I have nothing to do today, and no research to do, and I actually came to the hospital to hang out." What a sin! Lin Xiao was stunned, watching Chen Zhuan's retreating back, then couldn't help but laugh and shook his head. Birth, aging, sickness, and death, the inevitable topics of human life. So what would he do when faced with these four things? He didn't know. He didn't care anymore, turned and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the countless homes. Perhaps not a single one was lit for him, but he believed that everyone inside would be grateful for what he had done. Chapter 371 First Class Medal of Merit. To commend Professor Lin Xiao for his numerous breakthroughs in science and technology, including artificial nerves, mechanical prosthetic limbs, and electronic prosthetic eyes, these have opened up the possibility of recovery for previously injured service members and will provide our soldiers with greater peace of mind in the future. Furthermore, These technologies have benefited our society, saving countless lives and enabling disabled individuals to resume normal lives. Because these technologies are of immense significance and epoch-making significance for our human society, they embody the essential requirements of science and technology, align with our core values, and have made significant contributions to our national defense. Therefore, following deliberation by the Central Military Commission, we now officially award Professor Lin Xiao the first-class individual merit. An award ceremony was underway in the Golden Hall of the Great Hall of the People. The award being presented was a first-class merit. There's a saying that goes, third-class merit is received standing up, second-class merit is received lying down, and first-class merit is received by family members. While this may be a bit exaggerated, it clearly demonstrates how difficult it is to achieve meritorious service. This is especially true for the military's first-class merit. Both the police and the military have first, second, and third-class merit awards. Comparatively, military merits, even collectively, are incredibly difficult to obtain, let alone individual first-class merits. Nearly 1,000 people sat in the audience, attending the ceremony for the individual first-class merit awards. These nearly 1,000 people looked at the young man receiving the medal, perhaps with envy, but more often with admiration, gratitude, and gratitude. Because, given their respective positions, the techniques Lin Xiao had mastered were worthy of such respect. Based on their attire, they could be divided into three groups: those in military uniforms, those in police uniforms, and ordinary people. Among those in military and police uniforms, it was clear that many high-ranking officials were present. For these individuals, Lin Xiao's technique would undoubtedly stabilize their military or police forces. As the saying goes, why risk your life for only 3,000 yuan a month, while those who lost their lives are irreparable? Those who only lost legs, hands, eyes, or even spines can now recover. Therefore, for these senior executives, the technologies Lin Xiao has developed are a boon. Besides these prominent figures, there are also some individuals on the scene who are attracting considerable attention. Some of them sport mechanical prosthetic limbs, either legs or hands. Their metallic limbs are inspiring. Others wear heavy glasses, giving the appearance of severe myopia. However, if you see the wires on either side of their frames connected to their eyeballs, you might be startled at first, but you'll soon realize they are electronic prosthetic eyes. The former are those who were once disabled but have now regained full mobility after receiving Lin Xiao's mechanical prosthetic limbs. The latter are volunteers who recently participated in a clinical trial of the electronic prosthetic eye. Over a month has passed since the first batch of clinical trials began, and the second batch of blind individuals have already undergone surgery and have regained normal vision. Without glasses, the camera on the prosthetic eye has a resolution of 360p, but with glasses, it increases to 720p. While the pixel count at 720p isn't particularly impressive, in practice, it at least doesn't cause the kind of inability to distinguish between people and animals at a distance of 10 meters or 50 meters. Of course, this is all visible on the surface. There are many more invisible figures present, those who were once paralyzed but have regained their feet thanks to artificial nerve connections. Artificial nerves have been approved and officially entered the market, and there are at least 200 paralyzed patients who have undergone artificial nerve treatment. Many of these individuals were former soldiers or police officers who became paralyzed in the line of duty. Therefore, these individuals were invited to witness Lin Xiao's first-class award ceremony. Of course, they were the most deserving of the honor, as Lin Xiao's first-class merit was awarded because of them. In other words, Lin Xiao was their benefactor. Therefore, upon receiving the invitation, they generally accepted the invitation and came to witness Lin Xiao's award ceremony. Of course, in addition to these individuals, there were also some who had not experienced such tragic events but had come spontaneously. Just as Lin Xiao had imagined, after these technologies were developed, countless people expressed their gratitude to him from the bottom of their hearts. Whether it was curing paralysis, restoring limbs, or even restoring sight, each of these events brought joy. After all, it meant that from now on, while people still had to worry about these things happening to them, they no longer had to worry about their lives being ruined. Watching Lin Xiao on the stage accept the first-class Medal of Merit, everyone smiled and broke into enthusiastic applause. Amid the applause, Lin Xiao looked at the general in front of him, who personally took the medal and pinned it on his chest. "Congratulations, Professor Lin," the general said with a smile after pinning it on Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao also smiled and said, "Thank you, this is what you deserve, Professor Lin." The general nodded at Lin Xiao with a smile, then took the first-class merit certificate from the site and said, "There's another certificate. Come, let's take a photo together." Lin Xiao nodded, and together with the general, they held one end of the certificate and faced the cameraman, waiting for the photo. Below the stage. Brother Lin Xiao is so handsome. Tingting's family had also been invited. They sat in their respective seats, all looking at the scene with smiles on their faces. Tingting, wearing her thick glasses, stood up and looked forward, her little face fixed on Lin Xiao on the stage, clapping her hands and speaking happily. Having seen the world again for over a month, she had long since understood the meaning of color, black and white, and a rainbow. Even now, she didn't understand what people often complimented her on her beauty or called a boy handsome. Now, looking at Lin Xiao, dressed in a formal suit, she uttered the adjective. Beside her, her parents' faces were also beaming. Seeing their daughter so happy, how could they not be happy? "So, you mean you want to marry brother Lin Xiao?" her father asked with a smile. Tingting's face flushed. She now knew exactly what marry meant. Although it wasn't a word you had to see to understand. It was easier to understand when you could see it. Without being able to see it, no matter how hard you tried to understand it, it still didn't make the same sense. Tingting thought for a while before saying, "But brother Lin Xiao is 11 years older than me. Let's just forget it, right?" Hearing their daughter's answer, her parents burst into laughter. The father rubbed his daughter's head and said with a smile, "You really thought that, girl? Of course, Dad supports you, but the premise is that you have to learn to get close to your brother Lin Xiao first. Otherwise, you won't even be able to see him." The mother beside him patted her husband and said angrily, "Tingting is still so young, what are you talking about with her?" But Tingting nodded emphatically, "Yes, Dad, you're right. I want to become a scientist first." Hearing Tingting's words, the man raised his chin proudly at his wife, as if to say, "See, this is his way of parenting." His wife shook her head, not knowing what to say. At the edge of the police line, sat a police officer with a resolute face. Although his police uniform was just an ordinary police uniform, it was remarkably clean and straight. His police hat was perfectly stable, the national emblem on it gleaming brightly under the lights of the Golden Hall. Looking at Lin Xiao on the stage, his eyes were filled with gratitude and admiration. Then, he said to the person next to him, "Mom, it was him who helped me stand up again." This police officer was Zhou Shuang, the one who had been paralyzed after being hit by a drug dealer's car while chasing them. Now, thanks to his status as a police officer, he had been given priority for artificial nerve transplant surgery and had returned to the service with honor, becoming one of the first police officers to regain his footing after being paralyzed. The elderly woman sitting next to him was his mother. Upon hearing her son's words, his mother nodded slightly and stared intently at Lin Xiao, muttering, I know. This must be the living immortal, right? I really have to thank him." She stared at Lin Xiao intently, as if trying to determine who exactly this living immortal was. Zhou Shuang smiled at his mother's words. His mother, a Buddhist, had always believed that Lin Xiao was a living immortal. Otherwise, if he wasn't a living immortal, or perhaps a reincarnated immortal, how could he have helped her son stand up again? In this regard, Zhou Shuang never argued with his mother that it was science, not theology. As long as his mother was happy, it was enough. He has now returned to the police force and has a formal job again. What he has to do now is to work hard so that his mother can spend at least a relatively stable old age and no longer worry about his second half of life. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372, Higher Civilization and Lower Civilization. After the group photo and the presentation of medals and certificates, it was time for Lin Xiao to give his speech. Walking up to the podium and surveying the audience, Lin Xiao could easily discern the many grateful eyes on him. He spotted those equipped with prosthetic limbs, such as the 5 peacekeeping troops, including Zhang Li and his companions. He heard that these 5 men intended to return to the Middle East, to the places where they once fought, to continue their unfinished mission. Furthermore, their enhanced prosthetic limbs had significantly increased their combat effectiveness. After all, the human body is weak, and even running causes lactic acid to accumulate in the muscles. Even though humans are known for their endurance, they eventually tire. However, for those equipped with prosthetic limbs, such as those with both legs, their legs at least didn't tire. As long as their hearts and lungs reached their limits, they wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. Of course, most of the mechanical prosthetics present weren't enhanced versions, but simply ordinary materials. However, for these people, Lin Xiao still earned their gratitude. Lin Xiao's gaze quickly swept over those with prosthetic limbs, then glanced at those wearing electronic eyeglasses. Of course, he also saw the little girl, Tingting. Tingting noticed his gaze and smiled back. Of course, the other formerly blind people also showed excitement when they saw him looking at them. Perhaps for the blind, finding sight, or regaining it, was more exciting than for the disabled. With a slight smile, he glanced at the paralyzed and regained their feet. He couldn't tell, but he could probably discern some of the emotions in their eyes. For example, there was a resolute-looking man among the police officers, and his gaze was filled with gratitude. Finally, he withdrew his gaze. He didn't have a manuscript in his hand. Given his level of mental development, if he couldn't still give an impromptu speech, it would be a bit of a letdown. Thank you all for coming here to attend my first-class merit awarding ceremony. I'm flattered to see so many people. I also see a lot of acquaintances. Seeing the smiles on your faces, I know that you have rediscovered the meaning of life, and this is precisely the value of my first-class merit. Compared with the scientific and technological content contained in the technologies I have developed, the changes these technologies have brought to society are the most important. In a previous interview, I once said that the most fundamental meaning of science is to benefit mankind and make our lives better, not worse. This is the purpose of our development of science and technology, and obviously, I have achieved this temporarily now. Even the technologies I developed in the past, such as the lithography machine, do not meet this meaning, because these technologies are only used to benefit ourselves, and people abroad don't need me to benefit them because they already have them. But now, these technologies are the technologies that can truly benefit all of humanity. This is technology. At this point, Lin Xiao paused, then continued, I believe that in our future, more such technologies will emerge, continuing to benefit each and every one of us, and allowing our world to continue to develop towards a more advanced civilization. I'm not referring to the division between high and low civilizations from the perspective of science fiction, but the division between low and high civilizations based on moral levels. Civilizations with high moral levels belong to high civilizations, and this kind of civilization is mainly manifested in love, but low civilizations with low moral levels are perennially at war, or often directly or indirectly lead wars. Unfortunately, although Earth civilization has many branches, including some high-level civilizations, in the end, if averaged out, it still belongs to low civilizations. In that case, it seems difficult for us to develop into a high-level civilization, but let us believe for the time being that we will reach the level of a high-level civilization sooner or later, and I will also work hard in this direction. Lin Xiao glanced around and continued, well, that's all I have to say. As researchers, research is our job, and I believe you all have much more to do. So let me offer my best wishes to all of you who have been reborn. Forget your past and enjoy the life ahead. I believe you will find it easier to appreciate the joy of life. He bowed to the audience. Applause erupted, incredibly enthusiastic. Ma Gaolian, also present, clapped in the audience. He couldn't help but sigh. Finally, a speech I can understand. A leader sat next to him. Hearing Ma Gaolian's sentiment, the leader applauded and curiously asked, why do you say that? Ma Gaolian glanced at the leader and said, have you heard of the Navier-Stokes equations? The leader was slightly stunned. After a moment's thought, he said, I have some impression, but I can't remember the details. It's from mathematics. Ma Gaolian smiled, pointed at Lin Xiao, and said, the Navier-Stokes equations are a world-class mathematical problem that academician Lin solved. He used to give lectures on this. Do you understand? The leader finally realized what he was talking about, his lips twitching, and then he answered honestly, well, I really don't understand. Then he looked at Lin Xiao on the stage and said, but there's something interesting in academician Lin's speech this time. Ma Gaolian nodded. Indeed, everyone could tell who Lin Xiao was talking about, the low-level civilizations and high-level civilizations. Of course, they were all happy to hear this. After all, what he said was not wrong. If it got out, those branches of Earth civilization that were called low-level civilizations would be very angry and would take it personally. Of course, this was just verbal sparring, no real harm was done. Of course, the awarding ceremony ended there. The host took the stage for the final exit, and everyone began to leave. Normal people continued with their work, while those who had been reborn continued to enjoy their new lives. Meanwhile, news about the awarding ceremony quickly leaked, with many official media outlets covering it, including Lin Xiao's speech. Many were surprised by Lin Xiao's first-class merit award. After all, it's typically reserved for military personnel, and Lin Xiao clearly wasn't one of them. However, the military commission offered a simple explanation. After study, it has been determined that, although Lin Xiao isn't a soldier, he's fully eligible to receive the first-class merit award. Naturally, no one expressed dissatisfaction with this explanation, and Lin Xiao's countless fans also defended it. If Lin Xiao hadn't been enlisted, yet only received a first-class merit award, wouldn't he have been awarded a special class merit? Of course, this incident was just a minor incident. Most people weren't interested in it. They were concerned with Lin Xiao's speech, which divided civilizations into lower and higher levels based on moral standards. Suddenly, the entire internet was abuzz. Which civilization loved war, and which civilization didn't? Just report their ID numbers. The comments were hilarious. Let me see, who's the lower civilization that loves war? Oh. Let me see, who's the higher civilization that loves peace? Oh. It's me, come on, stop it. Who says civilizations have to be human? Aren't eagles the lower civilizations that love war? Eagles always love to persecute rabbits, do you think so? That's too obvious, isn't it? It should be more subtle. Okay, I know. The lower civilization Lin Xiao is talking about must be, tell me, netizens seem to be intently cooperating with Lin Xiao, choosing not to offer specifics but simply playing the role of riddlers. Of course, there were always one or two who offered rebuttals, prompting netizens to criticize him with accusations of hitting the mark and throwing stones at the dog. Of course, the content of Lin Xiao's speech was also posted online, prompting many foreign media outlets to panic and, failing to act appropriately, publicly demand an apology for his remarks, threatening to find flaws in his comments. However, Lin Xiao clearly didn't care about the risk of such attempts. For him, there was no need to worry, because if the foreign media truly wanted to find flaws, they would probably only find one, that he had resisted them. Naturally, his words sparked discussion among foreign netizens, some of whom were naturally dissatisfied with Lin Xiao's words and began to rail against him, even taking to his social media platforms to engage in a heated attack. Unfortunately, when Lin Xiao browsed the internet, he mostly looked at academic websites like Arxiv and rarely checked his social media accounts. He had originally applied for these accounts simply to facilitate more convenient communication with international scholars. Therefore, none of this had much impact on him. Of course, some international netizens spoke up for him, believing he had indeed developed technologies that would benefit humanity. These technologies would profoundly change society in the future. Thus, time passed, and the new year arrived. Artificial nerves, electronic prosthetic eyes, and mechanical limbs were officially approved and introduced to society. Some foreigners were also receiving treatment and new life from these technologies. However, in late January, a case captured the attention of many around the world. An American, formerly paralyzed but having received an artificial nerve transplant, was involved in a car accident. Chapter 373 The Mastermind. Shocking news, sudden failure of artificial nerves leads to car accident, risks of failure of artificial nerves in China, harmful artificial nerves. This car accident has been reported by numerous prominent international media outlets and has garnered worldwide attention. Car accidents are commonplace. Tens of thousands of accidents occur daily in China alone, resulting in at least 300 fatalities daily, which translates to 100,000 deaths annually due to car accidents. Of course, this accident occurred in America, a country with a population less than a quarter of China's, yet over 40,000 people die in car accidents each year. Therefore, such a car accident wouldn't normally attract so much attention. However, this accident involved a paraplegic, which is worthy of significant attention. Rather than a paraplegic, it's more accurate to say someone who had been paralyzed for 3 years, having been left with lower limb paralysis due to a car accident. However, thanks to the advent of artificial nerve technology, the paralyzed patient traveled to China at the end of last year and received an artificial nerve transplant, eventually regaining his feet and achieving recovery. This was supposed to be a good thing, but who could have imagined that so soon after his recovery, he would be involved in another car accident? Of course, the possibility of a person experiencing 2 serious car accidents in quick succession is low, but it's not impossible. However, an investigation has revealed that the accident occurred because the formerly paralyzed patient suddenly lost control of his body while driving, causing his right foot to remain pressed against the accelerator, unable to release it. Furthermore, this individual, a wealthy family member and the owner of an Audi R8 sports car, continued to accelerate, reaching over 300 miles per hour, leading to the accident. This speed is clearly too fast for a mortal to handle unscathed, and Davis ultimately died in the accident. Of course, this investigation also clearly demonstrates to the world that artificial nerves are not completely reliable and still carry the risk of failure. And no one knows when this risk will strike, while driving, swimming, or even admiring the scenery from a mountain top. Although there's only been one case so far, it's enough. This single incident alone has already caused concern among those with paralysis who have previously received artificial nerve therapy. Those without paralysis, upon hearing about this incident, have also joined the discussion. Suddenly, online doubts about artificial nerve technology began to surface, and these doubts quickly reached Lin Xiao. Where are those people who used to praise artificial nerves like they were magical? Why aren't they doing it now? I've already said that they're so daring to push such immature technology straight onto the market. I think they were just too obsessed with money. That's right, releasing such a futuristic technology without years of research and development is a bit outrageous. And now, look, there's a problem, and it happened overseas. They're completely humiliated. Those fans of someone are hilarious. They're quiet now, aren't they? These voices were always present, and of course, many sided with Lin Xiao, defending artificial nerve technology. You're kidding. People like you didn't show up before, but now you're showing up, right? Artificial nerves have saved countless families. And you're pretending you didn't see anything? Besides, there's only been one case so far, and it happened overseas. It's never happened in China. Why do I see you everywhere? Artificial nerves are just a material, and their structure is very simple. They're not mechanical. They only lose their function if they're severed. This is likely because the artificial nerves weren't properly connected to the human nerves during surgery, which led to this. 500,000 is a lot, and so, a war of words erupted online in China. However, Lin Xiao, one of the key figures involved in this controversy, ignored the online comments and instead attended an emergency meeting to discuss this incident. Professor Lin, you're here. Lin Xiao saw Shihao there upon entering the conference room. Among the attendees were members of the National Security Bureau, so Shihao's presence wasn't surprising. Lin Xiao nodded at him. Shihao, the people still discussing in the conference room raised their heads and looked at Lin Xiao as he entered. Hello, Academician Lin, Academician Lin, they all called out to Lin Xiao, greeting him. Lin Xiao nodded in return, then, guided by Shihao, took his seat. How's the discussion going? Lin Xiao asked. Before Shihao could speak, a nearby man smiled and said, Academician Lin, don't worry. This incident definitely has nothing to do with artificial nerves. We strongly suspect there's a mastermind behind this accident. Noticing Lin Xiao's gaze, the man smiled again and said, let me introduce myself. I'm Wang Xinghe, also from Guoan, and a colleague of Comrade Shihao. Lin Xiao raised an eyebrow. He certainly didn't believe his technique was flawed, but the idea of this mastermind piqued his curiosity. Hello, Mr. Wang. So, what's our conclusion? Yes, it's like this. Wang Xinghe nodded and began to speak. There are many suspicious points in this matter. The first is about the cause of the car accident. The official news released by them is that the artificial nerves failed, causing Davis' foot to remain on the accelerator. But now there is a question. Can the accelerator be pressed very deep by the weight of the foot? When we step on the accelerator, we need to use force with our feet. If we rely solely on the weight of the foot, at most we can only give a little gas, and it is impossible to speed the car to more than 300 yards. Besides, even if for some reason his foot really stepped on the accelerator hard, this person is only paralyzed in the lower limbs. His 2 upper hands can still move. When he found that his legs could not move, he could easily move his legs with his hands, thereby releasing the accelerator and gradually slowing down. Based on these 2 situations alone, this matter is very suspicious. Even if the person was unable to react due to nervousness, I don't think this is very likely. According to data investigations, it takes nearly half a minute for an Audi R8 to accelerate to 300 yards. I don't think half a minute is enough time for a person to react. Listening to Wang Xinghei's information, Lin Xiao couldn't help but touch his chin and nodded slightly. Indeed. A car's accelerator and brake are located differently. Relatively speaking, the accelerator is deeper and harder to press, and the resistance is also relatively greater, requiring more force than the brake. If the lower limbs are paralyzed, it's essentially impossible to exert the strength to press the accelerator. Furthermore, accelerating to 300 km per hour requires ample time to react. Therefore, unless Davis fainted, it's unlikely that he would be unable to react. This increases the possibility of a hidden hand behind this. Lin Xiao frowned, and suddenly thought of a possibility, and then asked, "By the way, after the car accident, where was Davis? Is he still in the hospital now?" As expected of academician Lin, he quickly grasped the key. Wang Xinghei smiled and said, "This is indeed the key question. Where did Davis go after the car accident? First of all, he was indeed sent to the hospital first, and then he was directly declared dead. He seemed to be rushed to the crematorium at this point in time. It is very likely that he has turned into ashes. I heard that Davis's family is making a fuss now, but obviously, this is very suspicious," Wang Xinghei said. "For people like me, we tend to believe that things like this where a person is taken to the crematorium without the consent of the family must have some unspeakable secrets hidden behind it. So, let me tell you in detail, this is basically confirmed. There must be a mastermind behind this matter." However, when Lin Xiao heard what Wang Xinghei said about the follow-up things, his brows immediately frowned. He then nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you. I have an urgent phone call to make." "Okay, go ahead," Wang Xinghei nodded. Although he was a little confused about what Lin Xiao was going to do, he figured it was some confidential matter. Lin Xiao quickly stood up and temporarily left the meeting room. The confidential matter he wanted to discuss was naturally about room temperature superconductors. Although Wang Xinghei was a member of the National Security Bureau, Lin Xiao didn't know if he knew about room temperature superconductors, so he didn't mention it directly. Of course, for now, he was very confident in the identity of the mastermind. This mastermind, clearly seeking to obtain the secrets of artificial nerves, fabricated this incident and then framed their artificial nerves. Of course, this framed incident was just one incident, not a big deal. The most important thing was the material used in artificial nerves, room temperature superconductors. Reaching a corner, he called Ma Gaolian. "Director Ma, do you know about the artificial nerve?" Ma Gaolian replied, "We already know." "Well, that's good," Lin Xiao said. "Then there's the risk of the CCDI leaking?" Ma Gaolian smiled. "Don't worry, we've already made all the arrangements for the room temperature superconductor. Since the Chinese New Year is just around the corner, it's time to announce it." Lin Xiao was stunned. "Are you ready to announce it?" Ma Gaolian said. "Yes, we were ready to announce the news before the artificial nerve was launched. So, academician Lin, you can rest assured now. We've long anticipated that they might use such despicable means to do something like this. After all, we've been rivals for so many years." Hearing this, Lin Xiao was finally relieved and smiled. "That's good. Then I don't have to worry." "Well, by the way, academician Lin, you can also prepare to become one of humanity's greatest scientists. After all, room temperature superconductors are enough for you to have such an honor." Chapter 374, Room Temperature Superconductor. Hearing Ma Gaolian's words, Lin Xiao was slightly taken aback, then nodded slightly. Room temperature superconductors are enough to earn anyone the title of greatest. After all, this is truly a technology of the future. For example, in the movie Avatar, humanity sets foot on the planet Avatar because it's home to abundant natural room temperature superconductor minerals. This is also why there are so many sky islands there, thanks to the vast amount of room temperature superconducting minerals that allow these islands to float under the immense magnetic force. Furthermore, the reason humanity needs these minerals in the movie is because these superconducting minerals can solve the energy crisis faced by humanity in the background story. This is the allure of room temperature superconductors. And now, as the developer of this room temperature superconductor, Lin Xiao, once his discovery is announced, will undoubtedly catapult him into the ranks of world history's greatest figures. Just like the scientists who launched the first industrial revolution, and those who brought electricity to every household during the second industrial revolution, the emergence of room temperature superconductors will once again change countless situations. Lin Xiao then smiled and said, although this kind of fame is pretty common for me, Director Ma, you still make me a little excited when you say that. Ha ha ha. Ma Gaolian laughed and said, then just get ready. We'll probably announce it the day after tomorrow, okay? A secret research institute in America. This country has many secret research institutes, such as the Biology Institute. This secret institute is primarily used to research secretly acquired technologies, such as technologies obtained through unconventional means, and then used to decipher the scientific principles underlying them before secretly destroying them. Ling. Confirmed, please push the door and enter. At the entrance to the institute, a man in a black suit, resembling a secret agent, withdrew his authentication card and walked in. He was carrying a box that looked like a disassembled gun from a movie, full of mystery. Soon, he arrived at a laboratory and saw a researcher in a white coat busy at work. Without stopping, he walked straight in. Dr. Finn, the stuff's here. The agent placed a box on a nearby table. The man in the white coat turned his head. He was apparently in his 50s. Upon seeing the box, Dr. Finn's eyes lit up. That's the artificial nerve, right? Yes, the agent nodded, then carefully entered the code on the box. If he got it wrong once, it would be very difficult to open it again. But finally, the code was entered, and the box opened. The box was huge, but inside was a small piece of thread. The thread, barely 2 centimeters long, was incredibly short and incredibly thin, almost seeming overly trivial compared to the box it was in. However, this was also to protect the tiny piece from damage. Dr. Finn's face lit up upon seeing the object. He walked over, picked up a pair of soft tweezers, and picked up the tiny piece. What a perfect masterpiece. I wonder how that Lin Xiao developed it. Hey, Finn suddenly laughed. Looks like I'll reveal the answer next. He then put it back and began preparing various items for the experiment. As he prepared, he asked, by the way, how did you get this thing? The agent spread his hands. Same old routine. Capture the person, get the thing, and then get rid of the person. The only difference this time is that after capturing the person, we have to perform a minor surgery to remove the thing. Then, after the person dies, we have to send him directly to the crematorium. Well, based on the current situation, the person should be reduced to ash. Haha, you guys are really quite skilled. Finn chuckled, not caring at all about the cruelty and darkness in the man's words. This wasn't the first or second time a secret research institute like theirs had gone through this. Besides, even if they were brutal, they weren't nearly as cruel as those secret biological research institutes. With so many people disappearing every year, it wasn't uncommon for hundreds or even thousands of them to be subjected to human experimentation. Without further ado, Finn quickly completed all the preparatory work and began testing the material. He began with routine checks, such as weight and volume, to estimate density. Of course, since the sample was so small and precious, destructive or damaging testing methods couldn't be used. He continued measuring one thing after another. Finn soon discovered that the material was actually composed of 2 layers, the outer layer encasing something else. He realized that the inner layer was the key. So he began testing it. Step by step, he reached the conductivity test. Finn knew that conductivity would be his most crucial test, because it was the key to determining whether this material could become a perfect artificial nerve. Come on, let me see if this thing conducts electricity the same way as human nerves. Otherwise, how could it conduct electricity without any difference? Finn's eyes flickered as he placed the incredibly thin structure inside the artificial nerve onto the experimental equipment. Then, he began to apply electricity. First, he applied a very small current. He was worried that applying too much current would damage such a delicate object. Let's start with 1 milliampere. Soon, the current began to flow, and the meter started to tick. But then, Finn froze. Huh? Why, 1 milliampere, and still 1 milliampere? He was puzzled. His meter had an accuracy of 0.001 milliamperes. 1 milliampere was obviously a lot compared to that, yet he was applying 1 milliampere, and the display was still 1 milliampere. Any resistance would change, right? He was puzzled. Was the meter broken? To confirm, he checked it again. But he quickly confirmed that it was not broken. So, what was the problem? Finn was even more bewildered. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't bring himself to consider the possibility that this thing was in a superconducting state, not a room temperature superconductor. Of course, since the meter wasn't broken, he'd keep trying. He tried again, perhaps amplifying the current. However, the result remained the same. No matter how much he amplified it, the reading remained the same. Finn was stumped. At this point, he was a little hesitant to speculate. Suddenly, the cell phone of the agent next to him, who had been awaiting the results of the experiment, rang. He spoke to Finn and stepped aside to answer the call. Finn's resolve was strong. While the probability was low, at this point, he had no choice but to speculate. Room temperature superconductor. This term seemed to hold a magical power among scientists. If it were true, Finn found it a little unimaginable, but at that moment, he had already begun to imagine it. And the method for testing room temperature superconductors was simple, the Meissner effect. He immediately gathered his experimental equipment and began testing for the Meissner effect. And so, a while passed. Suddenly, the agent ran over and shouted, "Dr. Finn, this thing is a room temperature superconductor. The Chinese have announced that this thing is a room temperature superconductor developed by Lin Xiao." At this moment, the agent witnessed something almost magical before Finn. The contents of the artificial nerve were floating above a magnet. Finn, however, seemed oblivious to the agent's words, staring at the scene with a look of daze. The Meissner effect, a characteristic unique to superconductors, was now demonstrating its unique properties at room temperature. CCDI is a special material developed by our country's scientist Lin Xiao, which can achieve superconducting properties at room temperature. According to the information, superconductivity refers to a conductive state that can conduct electricity without loss. It is different from common conductive materials. Common conductive materials such as copper and aluminum generally have resistance. These resistances will cause electricity to be lost during transmission. Superconducting materials have the characteristic of almost zero resistance, thus achieving the ability of lossless conduction. At the home of Zhao Xian, the father of Chinese superconductivity, he was eating with his family and watching the news broadcast at the same time. At this moment, watching the news broadcast on the news, he was stunned. The chopsticks fell from his hand, and he seemed not to see it. And he just repeated in disbelief, "Room temperature, superconductor." Chapter 375, Excitement at Home and Anxiety Abroad. "Dad, what's wrong?" Zhao Xian's actions puzzled the children and everyone else around him. The others didn't watch much TV, so Zhao Xian was practically the only one watching in their house. So, they had no idea what was happening. They were equally unaware of the disbelief and shock Zhao Xian was feeling. Zhao Xian almost suspected he'd misheard, or perhaps the news had mistyped the subtitles. Room temperature superconductors? What a joke. Even if room temperature superconductors were possible in the future, how could they be developed now? They still hadn't figured out the mechanism of high temperature superconductivity. Unless, Zhao Xian's eyes suddenly flashed, and a possibility occurred to him. If the mechanism of high temperature superconductivity had indeed been figured out, given his personality, he'd definitely keep it a secret and then find a way to develop a high temperature superconductor based on that mechanism. And suddenly, he remembered something else. Lin Xiao. Yes, the news said it was developed by that young man, Lin Xiao. He thought back to when Lin Xiao had first come to their institute. That's exactly what happened. Zhao Xian immediately understood the whole story. Lin Xiao had been researching superconductors for a while, but soon stopped working. Then, he suddenly came up with an artificial nerve, and then, incidentally, he solved the final mathematical physics problem in fluid mechanics. In short, Lin Xiao hadn't pursued superconductivity again. At the time, Zhao Xian felt a bit sorry, thinking such a genius had failed in superconductor research. Lin Xiao had even poached quite a few people from his institute. But now, it seemed like he had already achieved the ultimate goal of superconductivity physicists like them, so there was no need to research superconductivity anymore. He'd probably already started researching the applications of room temperature superconductors. It seemed likely that the artificial nerve would also use room temperature superconductors. After all, he thought, besides materials with properties that perfectly matched those of human nerves, only room temperature superconductors, capable of transmitting electrical signals without loss, could achieve this. Zhao Xian clapped his hands at the thought. Lin Xiao, you've been so devastatingly deceiving me. He couldn't help but feel angry as he thought about it. Even if he had no credit for the development of superconductors in China, he'd certainly made a significant contribution. People called him the father of Chinese superconductors, and now that room temperature superconductors have been developed, He's not even being credited. He'll have to settle accounts with the other insiders. I'll have to give them a hard time tomorrow, Zhao Xian said, his mind suddenly formed. Just then, his son asked again, Dad, what are you thinking about? Zhao Xian regained his composure, looked at his children and, of course, the rest of his family, and smiled. Well, I'm thinking about applying for retirement after the new year. Hearing Zhao Xian's words, his family members suddenly brightened. Dad, you finally understand that you should retire. Seeing Zhao Xian, even at his age, constantly running to the research institute, they were all worried. But hearing that he was finally considering retirement, they were naturally delighted. Zhao Xian sighed. It's not that I finally knew I had to retire. It's that I was forced to retire. His family members were stunned. Forced? Retiring voluntarily and being forced into retirement are two different things. So they couldn't help but ask Zhao Xian what was going on. Seeing their interjections, Zhao Xian laughed and said, All right, don't overthink it. It's simply because everyone else has figured out everything I've been researching. There's nothing left to research, so of course I have to retire. His family members were stunned again. Is there such a thing? Zhao Xian waved his hand and said, All right, enough talk, let's eat. He devoured almost 3 bowls of rice in a row, his appetite voracious. After all, a good mood naturally leads to a good appetite. Regardless, seeing the birth of a room temperature superconductor, and in his own country, certainly made Zhao Xian happier. Before the news was broadcast, it already meant the news had spread, and the news broadcast simply added fuel to the fire. News of room temperature superconductors spread across the world in an instant. This technology, with its potential to revolutionize the world, deserved such speed. It wasn't long before anyone with access to the internet was aware of the news, as reported by various news outlets. Through this news, people finally learned that Lin Xiao's previously developed artificial nerves were made using room temperature superconductors, and that his robotic prosthetic limbs and electronic eyes also utilized the power of room temperature superconductors. Even those unfamiliar with the significance of room temperature superconductors for the energy industry could understand their importance simply by looking at the benefits of artificial nerves. Consequently, excitement grew even more widespread. Of course, compared to China's excitement, other countries were aghast. If laundry detergent is considered a large-scale lethal weapon, then room temperature superconductors are superweapons capable of destroying the solar system. Other countries, through various means, demanded that China disclose its room temperature superconductor production methods. They argued, for the greater good of humanity, that this technology could help resolve humanity's energy crisis and should be made available to more people. Naturally, the authorities responded to this outrageous idea with a blunt, wishful thinking, just kidding, even a glimpse of this technology, let alone its public release, would be unacceptable. Of course, this wasn't surprising to foreigners, so the time had come to discuss and prepare for negotiations. Amidst this world-shaking technology, the previous car accident involving artificial nerves seemed to have been forgotten. This was naturally because the people behind the incident had stopped promoting this topic. After all, they had initially assumed it was a medical technology specifically for the human nervous system. Who could have imagined that it would actually be related to a fundamental industry, energy? Energy determines nearly 90% of the world's industries, whether manufacturing, industry, or even some sectors within the service sector. All are directly or indirectly tied to energy. After all, as long as electricity is used, it's connected, and this directly impacts the fundamental issue of energy costs. For some industries, electricity is their single largest expense, so even a 10-cent or 5-cent reduction can ultimately save 10% or more of the original cost. Room temperature superconductors clearly hold such potential. Consequently, the ruling classes of every nation are now mobilizing around this technology. However, compared to the excitement abroad, the atmosphere in China is quite different. According to the decision of the superiors, preparations have begun to build superconducting lines on lines with heavy power loads to reduce transmission pressure. Following the success of the artificial sun in 2022, the Institute of Plasma Physics is now planning to build a room temperature superconducting tokamak device. The quantum computer team led by academician Pang Wei of Huazhong University of Science and Technology has successfully built Zhuchangzi No. 3. It is reported that Zhuchangzi No. 3 uses room temperature superconductors as its core, achieving extremely excellent results. The energy sector has risen sharply. How huge is the dividend of room temperature superconductors? Room temperature superconductor maglev trains are already under planning. Superconducting energy storage and superconducting power generation have both entered pilot programs. My country's nuclear submarines are expected to begin installing magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion systems in 2024. It is reported that these magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion systems use room temperature superconductors, and the propulsion and quietness far exceed those of previous submarine propulsion systems. Experts predict, once room temperature superconductors are widely used, my country will once again enter a period of rapid development, with annual GDP growth potentially exceeding 10%. A series of news related to room temperature superconductors was released, dazzling all Chinese netizens who saw it. It was at this time that they finally realized the significance of room temperature superconductors. Looking at so many news reports flooding the screen, why do I feel like I've suddenly entered the future? Be confident, don't feel. It's just like that. Room temperature superconductors are a technology of the future. They hold such potential that, let me even say, building a sky island won't be a problem in the future. Room temperature superconductors could easily create something like this. Holy crap, a sky island? Is that so awesome? The sky island in Avatar is made of superconducting ore. Holy crap, even Avatar has this setting. It's even written in the backstory. Humanity landed on the planet Avatar just for these superconducting ore. Now you understand how important room temperature superconductors are, right? At this moment, I can only say that God Lin is a god among gods. Can this thing really be developed? I'm ready to enter the future. Is time starting to accelerate? China erupted in celebration, celebrating the birth of such a technology in their own country. Everyone began to imagine what their society would become when room temperature superconductors were truly put into widespread use. At least, the electricity bill that originally cost 300 yuan per month in summer will be saved by dozens of yuan, right? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.